She had been smiling all evening, and she was very good at it. Mara stood by the tall window of the restaurant, holding a glass of sparkling water, watching the city lights flicker below. The restaurant was on the 14th floor. The view was beautiful, the kind of view that made people feel like their lives were going well. She had chosen this place on purpose. She had looked it up 3 weeks ago, made the reservation, and told Daniel about it the way she always told him things, softly, leaving room for him to change his mind, preparing herself in case he did. He had not changed his mind tonight. He was here. He was wearing the navy jacket she liked. He was even laughing at something his colleague had just said, the kind of genuine laugh that reached his eyes and reminded her, every single time, why she had fallen for him in the first place. That laugh, she had loved that laugh before she had loved anything else about him. His name was Daniel Hartley. He was 34 years old. He worked in commercial architecture, designing buildings that other people would live and work inside for decades. He had steady hands, a quiet confidence, and a way of walking into a room that made people notice him without him trying. He was not loud. He was not the kind of man who performed for a crowd. He was the kind of man who said 3 words and meant all of them. Or at least, that was what she had believed when she first met him. They had met at a gallery opening, not the kind of gallery opening that sounds more exciting than it actually is. This one really had been worth attending. A friend of a friend had invited Mara, and she had gone alone because she liked going to things alone. She liked the freedom of it. She could leave when she wanted. She could stand in front of a painting for as long as she needed without worrying about boring someone. She had been standing in front of a large canvas, dark blue at the edges, burning orange at the center, when someone stopped beside her, not close enough to be strange, just close enough that she was aware of him. "It looks like the moment before something goes wrong," he said. She had not looked at him immediately. She kept her eyes on the painting. "Or the moment right after something goes right," she replied. A pause. Then, "That is a better reading." She had looked at him then. He was looking at the painting, not at her. That was unusual. Most people, when they opened a conversation with a stranger, watched the stranger's face to see how it landed. He was genuinely looking at the canvas, reconsidering it. She had liked that immediately. His name was Daniel. They had talked for 40 minutes. He had bought her a glass of red wine and then immediately apologized for assuming she wanted red wine, and she had laughed and said red was exactly right. They had exchanged numbers and he had texted her that same evening. Not late, not after midnight, not in a way that felt rushed or calculated. At 9:17 in the evening he had sent, "The painting. I have been thinking about it. I think you were right." That was how it started. Now, 18 months later, she was standing in this beautiful restaurant watching him laugh with his colleague, and she was trying very hard not to count the number of times in the past month he had actually looked at her the way he had looked at that painting. The number was not high. His colleague's name was Greg. Greg was nice. Greg was the kind of man who filled silences easily, who always had a story, who made dinner feel like a party without anyone having to try very hard. Mara liked Greg. She was also very aware that Daniel was more alive in Greg's company tonight than he had been in her company in several weeks. She did not say this to herself with bitterness. She said it to herself the way she said most difficult things, plainly, the way you might read a fact in a newspaper. Something is true. You note it, you move on. But the truth had been piling up lately, and she was running out of places to put it. Dinner arrived. The food was excellent. She had ordered the salmon and it was cooked perfectly. Daniel ordered the lamb and ate most of it, which meant he was in a good mood. When Daniel was in a bad mood, or one of his quiet moods, he barely ate. She had learned this early. She had learned a great many things about him by watching, because he did not often tell her directly. This was something she had thought of as attractive at first, his quiet nature, his self-containment. She had come from a loud family. Her mother spoke at a volume that filled every room she entered. Her older brother could argue about anything with anyone and find it enjoyable. She had grown up in a house where emotions were performed, where everyone said what they felt and then some. Daniel's quietness had felt, in the beginning, like a kind of rest. She understood now that there was a difference between quietness and absence. She had taken some time to name that difference, but she could name it now. After dinner, Greg headed home. Daniel and Mara walked out together into the cool night air. The street was busy. She was about to say something, she was not sure what, something warm, something about the evening, something to bridge the small gap that had been sitting between them like an extra chair at the table. And then Daniel's phone rang. He looked at the screen. "Sorry," he said, not to her but to the situation in general, and he answered it and began walking slightly ahead of her. She fell into step behind him, not by design, just because that was where she ended up. She listened to him speak. It was about a project, a building in the east end of the city. He was explaining something technical, something about load-bearing structures and revised timelines, and his voice was alive with the problem, engaged with it, turning it over with the same attention he had once turned toward that painting in the gallery. She watched the back of his jacket. Navy blue. She had always liked that jacket. She kept walking. 3 weeks after that dinner, Daniel asked her to move in with him. He did not ask in the way she had imagined it might happen, not over another dinner, not with a speech, not even sitting down. He had asked while they were unpacking groceries in his kitchen on a Sunday morning. He had his back to her, putting something in the fridge, and he said it the way he might say anything else. "You should move in. It makes more sense." She had stood holding a bag of oranges and stared at the back of his head. "Was that a question or a conclusion?" she said. He turned around. There was a small smile on his face. A real one. "Both," he said. She had laughed. She had said yes. She had meant it with everything she had. The move happened over a long weekend. Her friends helped. Her sister came with snacks and said the apartment had good light and that Daniel should buy more plants, which he never did. Her boxes fit more naturally into his space than she had expected. She had worried they might look wrong there, like someone else's things dropped into someone else's life. But they looked fine. They looked honestly like they belonged. That first month was good. She remembered it as warm in her memory, though she could not always trust her memory when it came to that period. She might be softening it now because of what came after, but she genuinely believed it had been good. They had fallen into an easy rhythm. She cooked on Tuesdays and he cooked on Thursdays, and on Fridays they ordered in and ate on the sofa and watched something on television, and she rested her feet in his lap, and he did not seem to mind. They talked, not always deeply, but enough. He asked about her work. She was a copy editor for a small publishing house, which she loved, a job that suited the part of her brain that noticed every small thing. He listened when she answered, or he seemed to. She remembered thinking, during those first weeks, that she had been lucky, that this was what it felt like to have chosen well. She had also, somewhere in the back of her mind, noticed something small, a pattern. When she asked him certain kinds of questions, personal ones, the kind that opened a door inward, he would give a short answer and then redirect the conversation. Not unkindly, not in a way that felt deliberate, but it happened consistently enough that she noticed it and filed it away, and told herself it was just his personality, just the quietness, just the self-containment that she had admired. She told herself, he is still becoming comfortable. He is still settling into this with you. Give it time. And time passed. And certain things settled, and certain things did not. The first real moment she can point to, looking back, was a Tuesday evening in October. Not dramatic. Nothing that would seem significant to anyone watching from the outside. She had come home from work later than usual because there had been a manuscript crisis. One of her authors had rewritten 3 chapters at the last minute, and she had stayed to work through it. She was tired in the way that made everything feel slightly too bright and slightly too loud. She had walked in to find Daniel at the kitchen table with his work spread out in front of him, drawings and printouts and his laptop open. He had not looked up when she came in. She had taken off her coat and hung it up and stood in the doorway for a moment. "Long day," she said. He said, not looking up. She had gone to the kitchen and made herself a cup of tea. She had stood at the counter drinking it in the small silence of the apartment. She had not been angry. She had been, and this is the word she came back to later, unnoticed. Like she had walked into a room where no one was looking for her and no one had missed her being gone. She told herself it was nothing. He was busy. She was tired. These things happened. She went to bed before him. He came in much later. She was not asleep. She heard him get into bed and heard his breathing slow and knew within a few minutes that he was asleep while she was still lying there looking at the ceiling. She thought, this is one night. One night is not a pattern. She was right. One night was not a pattern. The pattern took a little longer to arrive. But it arrived. What she did not know yet, what she would only begin to understand months later, then more clearly after a year, then with full clarity after 2, was that Daniel had not meant to become distant. He had not planned it. He did not know how to be any other way. He had grown up in a house where the measure of a man was what he built, what he achieved, what he could show for his time. His father had been respected in their town. His mother had been proud of his father's work. Emotion, in that house, was not discussed over the dinner table. It was managed privately, quietly, or not at all. He had learned to perform steadiness. He had learned that the job was to function, to deliver, to keep things moving. He had not learned how to sit still inside a feeling and let someone else be there with him. He was not a cruel man. He was not selfish in the way people use that word, taking deliberately, caring nothing about what they take from. He simply did not know how to let someone in all the way. He had let her in as far as he could. and the distance she was beginning to feel was not rejection. It was the wall at the end of the corridor. He had led her right to it without meaning to. He did not know the wall was there. None of this was visible to Mara yet. She could feel the edges of something, the way you feel a change in temperature before you understand the weather has shifted. But she did not have the full picture. Not yet. What she had, at this point in the story, was a man she loved in a home they shared in a city she liked, and a small, quiet feeling that had begun to live in her chest, like a stone she kept forgetting to put down. She had hope. She had patience. She had the memory of a gallery, a painting, a laugh that reached his eyes. She had 3 words he had said to her 2 months after they moved in, on a night when she had not expected them. She had been reading on the sofa, and he had come to sit beside her, and he had not said anything for a while, and then he had said them. 3 simple words. She had looked up from her book. His face was open in a way it rarely was, like a window someone had finally unlocked from the inside. She had said them back. She had meant them completely. That was the moment she decided, without deciding in any formal sense, that she was staying. That she was in this all the way. That whatever was complicated about him was something she was willing to be patient with, because love was sometimes that. Patient, willing, believing in the person that someone was still growing into. She had believed that. She had believed it for a long time after she probably should have stopped. But on that evening, in that apartment, with his hand warm beside hers and the city outside the window doing what cities always do, breathing and moving and going on, she felt entirely sure of herself and of him. The evening of the engagement began 3 months later. It was not a grand occasion. It was a Friday night in February. They had been to a small dinner with 2 of his friends, a couple they both liked, easy company, good conversation. On the way home they walked instead of taking a cab, because the night was clear and cold and she liked walking. He took her hand without her asking for it, which he did not always do, and they walked for 15 minutes without saying very much. Then he stopped. They were on a bridge over a canal. Not a famous bridge, not a beautiful bridge, just a bridge, iron and ordinary, and the water below was dark and still, and reflected the streetlights in long, wavering lines. He reached into his coat pocket. She looked at the ring, and then at his face. His face was serious, not unhappy, serious the way a person is serious when something matters to them. He was not rehearsed. He did not have a speech. What he said was real and simple, and she has carried it ever since. I want to build something with you. Not a building. Something that lasts longer. I think you know that, but I wanted to say it right. He made her 3 promises that night. Not as a speech, not with dramatic weight. They came out of the conversation that followed. The one they had standing on that ordinary bridge in the cold. The ring on her finger. Her hands in both of his. He promised he would be present, that he would try, really try, to stop disappearing into himself and leaving her on the outside. He promised he would communicate. That when something was wrong, or when something was heavy, he would say so instead of going quiet and expecting her to wait it out. He promised he would never shut her out, that no matter what happened between them, work, pressure, bad weeks, whatever came, she would always know she was the person he was coming home to. 3 promises. She said yes to the ring and yes to the promises and yes to all of it, with the canal below and the cold air around them and his hands warm around hers, and she felt the stone in her chest, that small, quiet thing that had lived there since October, lift, just a little. She told herself it was going to be different now, that they were beginning properly, that the distance she had felt was just early uncertainty, 2 people learning each other, and now that learning had led them here, to a bridge, to a promise, to a future she could finally see clearly. She had been wrong about some of that, but she did not know it yet. And standing on that bridge, with his eyes serious and warm and looking directly at her for once, she was not wrong to feel what she felt. She was not foolish to believe him. He had meant it when he said it. That was the part that made everything that followed so much harder to understand and so much harder to forgive. He had meant every word. And then, slowly, quietly, without anyone noticing until it was far too late, he had forgotten each one. The first promise broke quietly, the way most important things break. Not with a sound, not with a moment you could point to and say, there, that was it, but with a slow and steady pressure that wore something thin until it was no longer there. Mara noticed it in the small things first. This is usually how it goes. The large things announce themselves. The small things move in silently and make themselves at home before anyone thinks to check. It started with the mornings. Before the engagement. Before the promises. Daniel had a habit she had loved, without realizing she loved it. He would wake before her. He was always up first, had been since he was a teenager. built for early hours the way some people are built for late ones. And by the time she came out of the bedroom, there was coffee. Not always made for her specifically. He made coffee because he wanted coffee, and he made enough for two, and that was enough. She would come into the kitchen and the coffee would be there and he would be sitting at the table with something to read and they would have 15 or 20 minutes of morning together, quiet, unhurried, no demands, just two people occupying the same space in a peaceful way. She had not known how much she needed that until it stopped. It did not stop all at once, that is the thing. One morning he was up and out before she woke. A meeting, he said. Early client. She understood. The next time it happened, same reason, different client. The time after that, no explanation, just an empty kitchen. She had stood at the coffee machine making her own coffee and looking at the table and feeling something she could not immediately name. She named it later. It was the feeling of being removed from someone's morning routine without being told. She did not say anything. She did not want to seem small about it. Coffee and morning time were not the point of a life together, she told herself. He was busy. His work had picked up. The firm had taken on 3 large projects and he was the lead on 2 of them. She knew this. She was proud of him for it, genuinely. She just also wished, privately, in the careful place where she kept things she was not ready to say out loud, that being busy with his work did not always mean being absent from their shared life. The thing about Daniel was that he did not mean to be absent. This is what made it so difficult to be angry at him. When he was present, he was entirely present. A whole Tuesday evening where he cooked dinner and they talked about a book she was editing, and he had thoughts about it, real thoughts, interesting ones. And afterward they sat on the sofa and she fell asleep against his shoulder and woke up to find he had not moved. Those evenings were real. Those moments told her something true about who he was and what he was capable of. But they were not consistent. And inconsistency, she was learning, has a way of making the good moments feel fragile instead of solid. She had a friend named Claire. They had been close since university. The kind of close that does not require constant contact because the foundation is so sure. Claire lived in Edinburgh now and they spoke on the phone every few weeks. Mara told Claire about the mornings, about the way Daniel had seemed to pull back since the engagement, and Claire listened carefully and then said, "Maybe he is just scared. Some people get scared after they commit. It can make them retreat a little." Mara considered this. It was possible. Daniel was not an emotive man about his fears. He did not sit her down and say, "I am feeling anxious about our future." He did not lay his fears on the table for examination. He internalized things, and then those internalized things affected his behavior, and he was never fully aware of the connection. So she accepted Claire's theory. She held it close. She told herself he was adjusting, settling, finding his footing after the commitment they had made. And she waited. Waiting turned out to be a thing she was very good at. She had never known this about herself before Daniel, but she learned it in that first year with him. She was patient. She could hold space. She could be still while someone else figured themselves out. She had told herself for a long time that this was a strength. She would only understand later that it was also, at a certain point, a cost. Her work helped. She loved her work in a real and specific way, not the performed passion people display for things they feel they are supposed to care about, but genuine, daily investment. She read manuscripts at her desk and they took her somewhere, and she spent her days in other people's sentences and it nourished her. She had good colleagues. She had a small but steady life outside of the apartment, outside of Daniel, and it held her together in ways she did not fully appreciate until she needed it. The second promise, he had promised to communicate, began to show its cracks about 4 months after the engagement. They were arguing. Or they were doing the version of arguing that Daniel was capable of, which was not really arguing at all but a prolonged silence on his side and a growing frustration on hers. She had brought up the wedding, not in a demanding way, not with a deadline or an ultimatum, just a gentle nudge. She thought they should probably start thinking about dates, about what they wanted, about how they imagined it. She had a folder on her phone, not an obsessive folder, just a few saved ideas, colors she liked, venues she had looked at out of curiosity. She showed him the folder. He looked at it briefly. His expression did not change. "We have time," he said. "I know," she said. "I just thought we could start thinking." "I am thinking," he said, which meant he was not. She closed the folder. She put her phone down. She tried a different direction. "What do you want? For the day itself, what does it feel like to you?" A pause, a long one. "I don't know," he said. "Something simple. Simple like small, simple like outdoor, simple like just family, simple like simple." He looked at his laptop screen. She could see that he was already returning to whatever he had been doing before she came in. She sat there for another minute. Then she said, carefully, "Daniel, I am asking you to talk to me about this. About us. The wedding is ours, not mine. It would help me to feel like we are planning it together." He looked at her then. His face was not unkind. It was tired. There was something behind his eyes that she wanted very much to reach, and that she could not reach, because she did not have the key, and he did not seem to know there was a door. "I hear you," he said, and then he looked back at the screen. She went to the kitchen and stood at the sink and ran the tap and let the water run over her hands, not because she needed to wash them, just because she needed to do something with her body while her mind processed what her heart was feeling. She thought, "He said he would communicate. He promised me he would talk to me." She thought, "This is the second time this week I have tried to have a real conversation and felt a door close quietly in my face." She thought, "I love him." She thought, loving someone does not always tell you what to do next. She dried her hands. She went back into the living room. She sat beside him on the sofa, not touching, just there. He reached over after a few minutes and put his hand on her knee. Briefly, then he moved it back. She took it as an apology. She took it as an attempt. She said nothing more about the wedding that evening. The wedding, as it turned out, did not come together easily. Not because they could not agree. They agreed on most of the practical things when they finally sat down to discuss them. Small, they both wanted small. Family and close friends. Something real rather than performative. Those conversations, the concrete ones, he could manage. He was good at logistics. He was good at decisions that had clear outcomes. What he was less good at was the conversation underneath the planning. The "how do you feel about starting this chapter" conversation. The "are you happy, really, in the way that reaches all the way down" conversation. She tried to have those and they bounced off him like water off glass. He did not shut them down aggressively. He did not tell her to stop. He just became slightly vague, slightly distant, turned the dial on his presence down a notch. Until she changed the subject because it was less painful than watching him not know how to meet her. Her sister's name was Nora. 2 years older, lived 40 minutes away, was the kind of person who said exactly what she thought without cruelty and without apology. Mara called Nora one evening while Daniel was working late, which he was doing more often by then. "He shuts down," Mara said. "Not on everything. Not on work things, not on practical things, but when I try to have a real conversation about us, about how he feels about us, it is like pushing against a wall." Nora was quiet for a moment. "Is he treating you badly?" "No," Mara said. "That is the thing. He is not bad to me. He is not unkind. He just is not there, sometimes, emotionally, and I notice it." "Have you told him how much you notice it?" Mara thought about this. Had she? She had tried. She had brought it up gently, carefully, trying not to put him on the defensive. "I have tried," she said. "Trying gently is not the same as telling him clearly," Nora said. Mara knew Nora was right. She also knew herself. That directness of the kind Nora meant was difficult for her, not because she lacked courage, but because she was afraid of the answer. She was afraid that if she said it plainly, "I need you to be emotionally present and you are not," he would either shut down completely, or worse, agree that he could not be what she needed, and the whole thing would crack open, and she would lose him. She was not ready to lose him. She was still in love with him. That was the honest truth. The love was real. It was just being asked to do too much of the work alone. The second year began. Mara had imagined the second year would feel more settled. She had heard this about relationships. The first year you are still learning each other. The second year things ease. The rhythms become natural. The uncertainty resolves itself into something comfortable and durable. She had been looking forward to that. She was tired of navigating. She wanted to simply be. The second year did not feel more settled. In March, Mara became pregnant. She sat with this information alone for 2 days before she told Daniel. Not because she planned to keep it from him, but because she needed those 2 days for herself. To feel what she felt without anyone else's reaction getting in the way. She sat with the fact of it, the smallness and enormousness of it, and she found that her feelings were complicated. She had not planned for this yet. They had talked about children in the abstract, in the future tense way that couples do when they are not ready, but also not opposed. She was 31. He was 34. It was not impossible. It was not wrong. It was just faster than she had expected. She told him on a Wednesday evening. She had made dinner, which was perhaps why he was in a good mood, or perhaps he was in a good mood for other reasons. She told him plainly, across the table, watching his face. He went very still. "Okay," he said. "Okay," she said. "I mean, yes, okay." He put his fork down. "Are you all right?" "I am not sure yet," she said, which was the most honest thing she had said to him in weeks. He nodded. He looked at the table. He looked at her. What do you want to do? She had known he would say this. She had known he would put the decision with her, not because he did not care, but because he defaulted to her for emotional decisions, the way he defaulted to his instincts for structural ones. It was not cruelty. It was just how his mind organized things. I want to talk about it, she said, with you, together, as two people who are going to have to decide together. The conversation that followed was the most real conversation they had had in many months. He opened, not all the way, but enough. He said he was not sure he was ready. She said she was not sure either. He said he thought they would figure it out. She said she hoped so. They sat there in the kitchen with the dishes going cold and they talked for almost an hour, and by the end of it she felt, for the first time in a long time, like she was talking to her partner. She was 8 weeks along when she began to miscarry. It happened on a Saturday. She was home alone. Daniel was at the office. She called him and he came home within 40 minutes, which was fast given the distance. He was serious and steady, and he took her to the doctor, and he held her hand in the waiting room. But in the days that followed, the quiet, hollow days that came after, the ones where she felt scraped out and empty and in need of something she could not quite name, he was not there. Not physically. He was in the apartment. He made sure she ate. He checked on her. But he did not sit with her in the feeling. He did not grieve beside her. He processed it, it seemed, by not processing it, by moving briskly forward, by treating the episode as something to be cleared away rather than something to be lived through. She needed him to grieve with her, and he did not know how. She lay in bed on a Tuesday night listening to the quiet of the apartment, and she thought about the 3 promises. She thought about presence. She thought about communication. She thought about the 3rd promise, that he would never shut her out, that she would always know she was the person he was coming home to. She thought, he is home. He is right here, and I have never felt more alone. She did not tell him this. She was in too much pain and he seemed too far away, and she was not sure it would reach him even if she tried. She thought, he loves me. She thought, love is not always enough. She thought, I do not know what to do with that. She pulled the blanket around her shoulders and closed her eyes and lay in the dark beside a man she loved, who did not know how to hold her, and she made herself breathe, slowly, in and out, until the night got quieter and her body got heavier, and eventually, mercifully, she slept. Outside the window the city moved on without stopping. It always did. That was the thing about cities. They did not wait for you to catch up. And sometimes, in the middle of the night, that felt like the most honest thing in the world. Morning came the way it always does, indifferently, without asking whether you were ready for it. Mara woke at 6:40 and lay still for a moment, assessing herself the way she had started doing every morning since the loss, running a quiet internal check. How does today feel? Is it going to be one of the manageable days or one of the heavy ones? This particular morning felt somewhere in between, which she had come to understand was actually a kind of progress. Daniel was already gone. Of course he was. She got up and made her own coffee and stood at the kitchen window while it brewed. The morning light was coming in gray and even. There was a tree outside the window, a narrow city tree planted in a square of dirt in the pavement, and its new spring leaves were pale and just opening. She had been watching that tree since they moved in. She had watched it go bare in autumn and empty in winter, and now here it was, starting again. She thought about that for a moment, starting again. She poured her coffee and sat at the table and thought about what Nora had said on the phone last week. You do not have to make any decisions right now. You do not have to figure out what this means for the 2 of you yet. Just get through the week. Just get through the week. It was not glamorous advice, but it was the right advice. She had been getting through weeks for 2 years now. She was good at it. She was perhaps too good at it. She could survive almost anything if she broke it into small enough pieces. A day. A morning. A cup of coffee at a kitchen table with the light coming in gray and even. She was not sure this was entirely healthy, but it was what she had, and so she used it. She finished her coffee. She got dressed. She went to work. She sat at her desk and opened a manuscript, a novel by a woman in her 50s about a marriage that was coming undone, told with such precise and careful observation that Mara had to put it down sometimes and look out the window for a minute before going back. She read 2 chapters that morning. She made notes. She did her work well, as she always did, because work was something she could do right even when other things were going wrong. At lunch she sat outside on a bench with a colleague named Owen, who was funny and kind and who had lost his father 2 years ago, and had that particular quiet in him that grief puts into people, the kind that makes them better at sitting with other people's pain. She did not tell him everything. She told him enough. He listened. He did not try to fix it. He said, I am sorry, Mara. That is a hard stretch. She nodded. It is a hard stretch. she agreed. She went back inside and finished her afternoon and took the train home and cooked pasta and ate it alone, because Daniel texted at 6:30 to say the meeting was running long, and she said okay, and she cleaned the kitchen and went to bed with a book and was asleep by 10. This was her life currently. This was what it looked like from inside. From outside it might have looked like a woman who had things together. And in many ways she did. She functioned. She did her job well. She maintained her friendships. She kept herself fed and clothed and upright. She called her mother on Sundays. She did not collapse. But something was slowly changing inside her, not breaking, shifting, like the ground beneath a house that looks perfectly solid from the street but has, beneath the surface, been moving in small and patient increments for a very long time. She was storing up the weight of unsaid things. She was absorbing, day by day, the cost of being the only one in the relationship who was trying to keep it emotionally alive. She had not named this yet. She would, but not yet. For now she read her book and let the night settle around her, and breathed. And somewhere across the city, in a glass-walled room with architectural drawings pinned to a board, Daniel stood at a table with 3 colleagues discussing load calculations, and he was fully present, fully engaged, fully himself. And the distance between them, so quiet you could almost miss it, grew another fraction of an inch. By the 3rd year, Mara had stopped counting the promises. Not because she had forgotten them. She remembered them with a precision that surprised her sometimes. The cold air on the bridge, the canal below, his hands around hers, the words in that particular order. She remembered them the way you remember things that happen at turning points, with a clarity that ordinary moments never quite carry. She remembered them and she knew, without needing to examine the evidence again, that not one of them had been kept. She had simply stopped counting because counting had stopped helping. What she did instead was manage. She had become very skilled, over the course of 3 years, at managing the shape of her own disappointment. At the beginning she had felt it sharply, like a physical thing, a bruise that kept getting pressed. Somewhere in the 2nd year it had become less sharp and more steady, a low, constant pressure she had learned to carry without it showing. By the 3rd year it had become simply the weather of her life. She did not think of it as suffering. She thought of it as the texture of loving someone who was not quite able to love you back in the full way you needed. She told herself this was normal. Most relationships had a gap in them somewhere, an asymmetry, a place where one person wanted more than the other was able to give. This was not failure. This was just reality. You adjusted. You found other ways to fill the space. You did not expect one person to be everything. She believed most of this, but not all of it. The part she could not quite get herself to believe was that it was always supposed to feel this lonely. Owen, her colleague, noticed that she was quieter than she used to be. He did not say this directly. He said it sideways, the way kind people do. "Do you want to get lunch? You seem like you could use a change of air." She went to lunch with him more often that year. They talked about books and work and the long, complicated mess of being a person in the middle of their 30s, and it helped. It did not fix anything, but it reminded her that she was not invisible, that the quality of her attention and her presence was something another person could register and appreciate, which was a thing she had needed to be reminded of. She and Daniel had moved the wedding to the following spring. Then they had moved it again. The second postponement had been partly practical. His firm had gone through a restructuring and the timing was bad, and partly something she did not examine too closely, because examining it led somewhere she was not ready to go. What she knew, she was still engaged. She was still in this apartment. She still loved him. And she had, over the past 12 months, slowly stopped trying to have the conversations that mattered. Not stopped trying in a dramatic way. There was no moment when she sat herself down and said enough. It happened in smaller increments. She would begin a conversation and see the familiar look come across his face. Not dismissal, not cruelty, just a kind of blankness, a slight recession behind his eyes. And she would run a quick calculation and decide the cost of pushing forward was not worth the return, and she would let the subject drop. And then the next time she would do the same calculation and reach the same conclusion, and eventually the calculations became automatic. Eventually she stopped starting the conversations at all. The apartment, by the 3rd year, was a quiet place. Not coldly quiet, just quiet. They ate dinner together some evenings, and on those evenings things were fine, normal. A version of companionship that would have satisfied a lot of people and probably should have satisfied her more than it did. They watched television together. He fixed the leaking tap in the bathroom without being asked. She bought the coffee he liked when she was at the market. These were the ordinary small acts of a shared life, and they were real, and she did not dismiss them. But real is not the same as enough. This was the thing she kept bumping into. Her friend Claire came to visit in the autumn. 2 nights. A spare mattress in the second bedroom, which they had been calling the spare room since the wedding plans had been suspended indefinitely. Mara cooked and they drank wine and talked for hours, the way they had always been able to talk. And on the second night, after Daniel had gone to bed, Claire looked at Mara across the kitchen table, with the direct look that Mara knew meant she was about to say something honest. "Tell me how you actually are," Claire said. "I am fine," Mara said. Claire waited. "I am fine," Mara said again, and then heard how it sounded, flat and unconvincing even to herself, and put her glass down and said, "I am tired." "Tired how?" Claire said. Mara thought about it. "Tired of hoping for things to change. Tired of having conversations with myself that I wish I could have with him. Tired of sitting in the same room as someone and still missing them." Claire was quiet for a moment. "Are you happy?" The question landed with a weight that surprised her. She had been asked it before. She had asked it of herself before. But something about the lateness of the hour and the wine, and the honesty of the setting made it hit differently. "I am not unhappy," she said. "But I do not think that is the same thing." Claire nodded slowly. "No," she said, "it is not." They sat with that for a moment. "What would make you happy?" Claire asked. Mara picked up her glass again. "To feel like I matter to him. Not in a grand way, not in a constant way, just regularly. Like the fact of me is something he thinks about when I am not in the room." She paused. "I do not know if I believe that happens. I used to. Now I am less sure." "Have you told him this?" "I have tried," Mara said. "In different ways, at different times. And nothing changes." She said it plainly, without anger. "He hears me. I think he genuinely hears me. And then his life continues in exactly the same way it was going before I said anything. And mine continues waiting for a change that does not come." Claire looked at her carefully. "Mara, how long have you been feeling this way?" Mara thought about the bridge, the promises, the gallery and the painting. "A while," she said. "What are you going to do?" And this was the question Mara could not answer. Because what she wanted to do was stay and have it be different, and what she was slowly beginning to understand was that those two things might not both be available to her. She slept badly that night. She lay in the dark beside Daniel, who was breathing steadily beside her, and she stared at the ceiling and felt the full weight of where she was. 3 years, 3 promises. She had given all of herself to this. Her patience, her flexibility, her hope, her willingness to believe in a person she loved, and to keep believing, even when the evidence made belief difficult. She had shown up, every time. She had kept the faith. She had made excuses for him in her own mind, and to Nora and Claire, and to herself at 3 in the morning when everything got harder. She had told herself he was trying, he was growing, he was limited by his past but not defined by it. She had wanted so much to be right about that. What she was beginning to understand was that wanting something to be true and it actually being true are two separate things, and she had been confusing them for a very long time. The next morning was a Saturday. She came into the kitchen and Daniel was there, which was unusual for a Saturday. He often went to the office on Saturday mornings, another thing that had become normalized over time, another habit she had adjusted to without realizing she had adjusted. He was making eggs. He was in a good mood. He smiled when she came in and said he had made enough for 2. She sat at the table and he brought her a plate and they ate together and he talked about a building he had been working on, a renovation project for an old warehouse in the south of the city, and he was alive with it, describing the original ironwork and what they were trying to preserve. His eyes were bright, he was animated. He was, in this moment, the man she had fallen in love with at the gallery, engaged, specific, genuinely excited. She watched him and she felt, at the same time, profound love and profound grief. Both of them, simultaneous, sitting right beside each other in her chest. She thought, "I love you so much, Daniel." She thought, "And it is not enough." She did not say either of these things. She ate her eggs. She listened to him talk about the ironwork. She asked a question about the project, and he answered it with enthusiasm, and she nodded, and somewhere behind her eyes, the stone that had lived in her chest since the beginning was not small anymore. It had been growing, slowly, carefully, without her permission, for 3 years. It was quite heavy now. She washed the dishes after breakfast. She dried them and put them away. She wiped the counter. Daniel went to make a phone call in the other room and she heard his voice, low and engaged, talking to someone from work on a Saturday morning, and she stood at the kitchen window and looked at the tree outside. Bare now, its new spring leaves long gone, its branches reaching into gray November air, and she thought about the woman she had been 3 years ago on a bridge with a ring on her finger and a heart full of belief. She thought about what it meant to keep a promise. She thought about what it cost to receive one that had never been kept. She thought about how long patience could reasonably be expected to hold before it became something else. Not patience at all, but surrender. And she thought about the difference between the two. She was not done yet. She had not made any decision. She was not at the end, though she was beginning to understand that the end existed, that it was somewhere on the road ahead of her, that it was no longer a theoretical destination but a real one. She was not there yet. But she was getting there. One ordinary morning at a kitchen window, one quiet accumulation of unreturned effort at a time. The afternoon passed. Then the evening. She read. He worked. They said goodnight. She lay in the dark. And the stone in her chest lay still and waited, as stones do, with all the patience in the world. The weeks that followed were ordinary in the way that painful stretches of life often are. Nothing dramatic happened. There were no arguments, no eruptions, no scenes. There was just the slow, steady accumulation of days in which Mara moved through her life feeling like something essential was missing from it, and Daniel moved through his feeling that everything was, more or less, fine. That gap, between her reality and his, was perhaps the thing that hurt most. She had begun to see their relationship, in unguarded moments, as two separate stories that had been told in the same book for 3 years. His story, a man building a life, working hard, loving his partner in the limited ways available to him, largely satisfied with where things stood. Her story, a woman who had offered everything she had to a partnership that kept returning it, quietly, not unkindly, but steadily, as if her full investment was more than the situation could absorb. In December, she went home to her parents for a long weekend. Daniel did not come. He had a project presentation, and she went alone, which was easier in some ways and harder in others. Her parents were warm people. Her mother cooked too much and her father asked too many questions about the wedding, and she deflected them both with the practiced skill of someone who had been deflecting the same questions for a year. She slept in her childhood bedroom and looked at the ceiling and felt very young and very tired simultaneously. Her mother came into the room on the second night, just to say goodnight. She sat on the edge of the bed the way she had when Mara was a child, and she looked at her daughter with the particular attention that mothers sometimes have, the kind that sees through everything you are trying to project. "Tell me," her mother said. Mara looked at her. "There is not much to tell," she said. Her mother did not argue. She just stayed. She sat there and waited, which was, Mara thought, something she must have passed on to her daughter genetically, because patience ran in the women of this family like a quiet river. "I do not know if he can be what I need," Mara said finally. "I think he wants to be. I think he believes he is. But I do not know if wanting to be something and actually being it are the same." Her mother was quiet. Then she said, "Have you told him this? Exactly like that?" "Not exactly like that," Mara said. "Maybe that is where to start," her mother said. "Not with what he has done wrong, with what you need. Just that." It was simple advice. It was the kind of advice that is so direct it almost sounds naive, until you realize that the direct things are usually the ones we avoid longest because they are the most frightening. Saying plainly, "Here is what I need from you," opens you entirely. It removes every layer of softening. And if the answer is still not enough, there is nowhere left to hide from what that means. Mara went home on Sunday evening. She told herself she was going to have that conversation, not the careful, hedged version she had been having for 3 years. The real one, the one where she said clearly, without protecting either of them, exactly what she needed, and exactly what she had not been receiving, and exactly how much longer she could go on without it. She got back to the apartment and Daniel was there. He had ordered food, her favorite, from the Thai place around the corner, and he had set the table and he looked pleased to see her, and he asked about her weekend and she sat down across from him and told him it had been good, and they ate together, and the food was exactly right, and the evening was warm and ordinary, and she thought, tomorrow. I will have the conversation tomorrow. Tomorrow turned into the day after, and the day after turned into the week after, because this was also a thing she was very good at, knowing exactly what needed to be done and finding excellent, reasonable, completely understandable reasons not to do it just yet. She understood herself in this. She was afraid. She was afraid of the conversation not working, of saying the plainest thing she had ever said and having it change nothing, because then she would have no softness left to hide behind. She would be standing in the full truth of her situation, with nothing between her and it. She postponed the conversation. She went on postponing it with the same patience she had given everything else. But something was changing, all the same. Something quiet and sure. She could feel it the way you feel a shift in the season before any visible sign of it arrives. Something in the air, something in the quality of the light, something you cannot name but know. She was changing, not in a dramatic or sudden way, in the way that things change when they have been pushed past the place they were designed to hold. When a material bends and bends and bends and eventually, very quietly, becomes a different shape entirely. The woman who had stood on the bridge 3 years ago, full of belief and hope and the clean certainty of a new beginning, was still inside her. But she was standing further back now, and further forward, right at the front of who Mara was someone different. Someone who had been through 3 years of holding on. Someone who had given everything she had to give, and had been running on reserves for longer than she wanted to admit. Someone who was beginning, slowly and without drama, to see herself clearly. That person had not yet made a decision, but she was getting ready to. In the new year, she booked a solo trip to a coastal town she had wanted to visit for years. 3 days, a small hotel, the sea. She told Daniel, who said, "That's good," and meant it. And she booked it, and she went alone in February, in the cold, and she walked on the beach for hours each day, and she breathed salt air, and she thought, without the noise of her daily life around her, about what she wanted her life to look like. She thought, not this. She did not say this with anger. She said it with something more like sorrow and more like relief simultaneously. The truth, when you finally stop avoiding it, has that quality. It hurts, and it frees you at the same moment. Not this. She stood at the edge of the water on the last afternoon and watched the waves come in, and she thought about the woman she was, and the woman she had been trying to be, and all the effort it had taken to keep the two of them from separating from each other. She thought, I am allowed to want something different. She thought, I am allowed to stop waiting. She thought, I do not know what comes next, but I know I am not going to spend another year being this lonely, inside a life that looks, from the outside, like enough. The sea did not answer her. The sea never answers anyone. It just keeps coming in and going back out, which is perhaps the point. It keeps moving. It does not stop for anyone's sorrow, or anyone's realization, or anyone's long overdue moment of clarity. She drove home on a Sunday. She let herself into the apartment. She put her bag down. Daniel was out. She made tea and sat at the kitchen table and looked around at the space they shared, the chairs they had picked together, the books on the shelves, the small framed print she had bought at a market 2 years ago that she still liked, his jacket over the back of a chair, and she felt everything it was to love a life and know it is not the right one. She was not finished yet, but she was close. She could feel it, the way you feel the end of a season before the calendar tells you. Something was about to change. She was going to be the one to change it. There is a particular kind of man who does not know he is cold until the world around him has already frozen. Daniel Hartley was 37 years old the spring Mara came back from the coast with something changed in her eyes, and he did not notice the change. This was not unusual. He had not noticed many things about her, not because he did not care, but because the interior workings of another person were not something his mind had ever learned to read with precision. He was trained in structures. He was trained in what could be measured, calculated, reinforced. The invisible architecture of a relationship, the emotional load-bearing walls, the places where pressure was accumulating, the small cracks that signaled something larger, these were not visible to him. He had grown up in a town in the north of England, the second of 2 sons, in a household where his father ran a successful civil engineering firm and his mother ran the household with the same efficiency and minimal complaint. They were a functional family, not an expressive one. His father worked long hours and came home and ate dinner and asked about school and went to bed. His mother managed everything else and did it without apparent resentment, or at least without visible resentment. And Daniel had absorbed this as the model of how an adult lived. You worked, you provided, you kept things running. You did not require anyone to hold your feelings for you because you handled them yourself, quietly, in the space of your own mind. And then you got up the next morning and worked again. He had been told, once in his 20s, by a woman he had dated for almost a year, that he was emotionally unavailable. He had heard this and thought it was unfair. He had been there. He had shown up. He had not been cruel or inconsistent. He had simply not been the constant emotional presence she wanted. And he had thought at the time that her wanting was excessive, that she had needs he could not meet and that the fault lay in her expectations rather than in him. He had told himself this comfortably. He had believed it. He had believed it, with small variations, through the relationships that followed, each one ending with a version of the same conversation. She wanted more than he could give. She needed things he did not know how to provide. He was good at the practical things, the logistics, the concrete expression of care. fixing things, solving problems, being present for crises. But the daily, consistent emotional availability that the women in his life needed was not something he had in his toolkit. With Mara, he had believed it was different, and in some ways it had been. She was quieter than the others. She did not demand in the way they had demanded. She gave him space in a way that felt, early on, like understanding. He had taken that space because space was what he knew how to be comfortable in. He had not understood, or had not let himself understand, that her spaciousness was not indifference. It was generosity. And you can take from someone's generosity for a very long time before you realize what you have been doing. He thought about Mara a lot, those days. But thinking about her for Daniel meant something different than it might mean for someone else. He thought about whether she was happy in practical terms, whether she liked the apartment, whether her job was going well, whether she seemed well fed and rested and physically fine. He did not think, in any conscious or careful way, about whether she was fulfilled, whether she felt seen, whether the sum of their 3 years together had given her what she had come into it hoping to find. He was not incapable of thinking about these things. He simply did not think of them unless prompted, and she had stopped prompting. This too he had not noticed. The night of her birthday changed something, though it would be 2 months before he understood that it had. He had meant to be there. He had planned to be there. The dinner was in his calendar, had been for 3 weeks, and he had thought about it with the particular part of his mind he used for scheduling, noted it, confirmed it, set an intention to leave the office at 6. What happened was that a project he was responsible for hit a critical stage at 4 in the afternoon, a structural calculation that needed review before it could go to the client first thing the next morning, and he sat down to review it, and it took 2 hours instead of 45 minutes, because one of his junior architects had made an error that required them to go back to the original drawings. At 6:15 he looked at the time and felt a drop in his stomach. He texted her. He said, "I am so sorry. The project hit a problem and I cannot get away. I will make it up to you. I am really sorry." He meant the apology. He was genuinely sorry in the way he was capable of being sorry, not in a feeling way, not in a way that gripped him and made him feel the weight of what he had done. But intellectually, he knew he had let her down. He knew this was not a good night to let her down. He sent the text and then he turned back to the drawings because the drawings could not wait, and she, he assumed, would understand. She did not answer the text. He noticed this at around 8:30, when he finally sent the last of the corrected files. She had not replied. He looked at the message again. Read receipt showed she had seen it. He thought about calling and then decided she probably needed some space and it would be better to have the conversation in person when he got home. He got home at 10. The apartment was quiet. The kitchen was clean. She was in bed, facing the wall, and she did not move when he came in. He stood in the doorway for a moment. He thought about going to her. He thought about saying something. He decided she was asleep. She was not asleep. He went to wash his face and brush his teeth, and when he came back to bed, she was still facing the wall, and he settled in beside her and said, quietly, "I really am sorry about tonight." No answer. He lay there for a moment. He thought, she needs sleep. She is hurt, but she is tired. Tomorrow I will make it right. He was asleep within 7 minutes. She knew this because she counted his breaths until they slowed. She lay in the dark for another 2 hours. She thought about his text. She thought about sitting at the restaurant table alone, about the waiter who had brought her the bread basket anyway and had not looked at her with pity, or at least had been kind enough not to show it. She thought about the glass of wine she had ordered and the decision that had come to her quietly, like something she had always known and only now acknowledged. She thought, this is what 3 years of broken promises looks like. Not one explosion, not a dramatic betrayal, just a woman alone at a table on her birthday reading a text that says, "I cannot get away." She thought, I have been the most patient version of myself for 3 years, and it has not changed a single thing. She thought, he said he would be present. He promised me he would communicate. He promised me I would always know I was the person he was coming home to. She thought, he came home tonight to a sleeping apartment and he did not even check if I was actually asleep. She did not cry. This was the most significant thing of all. A year ago she would have cried. 6 months ago she might have woken him and had it out, finally. The real unguarded version of all the things she had been carrying. But tonight she did not cry, and she did not speak, and she did not wake him, because something inside her had reached a point that was quieter and more final than tears. She was done waiting for him to become the man he had promised to be. She did not know yet exactly what she was going to do. She did not have a plan. She had only a certainty, bone deep and steady, that this was the last time she would spend a significant evening of her life, feeling the specific kind of grief that comes from loving someone who cannot or will not be fully there for you. The next morning she woke early, before him. She got up and made coffee and sat at the kitchen table, and when he came out, still in the navy jacket he had worn last night, he had fallen asleep in it, she looked at him across the table and said, quietly and clearly, "I need to tell you something, Daniel. And I need you to actually listen, not to the surface of what I am saying, to what is underneath it." He sat down. He looked at her. His face was serious. "Okay," he said. She told him, "Not everything. 3 years is too much for one morning. But the essential things." She told him about loneliness. She told him about the miscarriage and about grieving mostly alone in a room he was physically inside. She told him about the conversations she had stopped trying to have because they cost her too much and returned too little. She told him about the stone in her chest. She told him about last night and what it had felt like to sit at that table, not alone exactly, but without the person who was supposed to be her partner. She spoke for a long time. He sat across from her and he did not interrupt. He did not look away. For once, for perhaps the first time, he was listening in the full sense of the word. When she finished, there was silence. Then he said, "I did not know it was that bad." She felt the sentence land on her like something both precise and devastating. "I have been telling you," she said, "in different ways, for a long time." He nodded. She could see something working in him, something trying to get through a barrier he had spent his whole life building. "I know," he said. "I know you have." "What do you want to do with what I just told you?" she asked. He looked at the table. He looked at her. "I want to be better," he said. "I want to try properly. I know I have not been doing that." She nodded. She heard him. She looked at him carefully, at the sincerity in his face, at the effort it was costing him to sit there with this open instead of closing back down, and she felt love for him that was real and complicated, and threaded through with something she could not ignore. She said, "I need to see it, not hear it. I have heard it before." He nodded. She said, "I mean that. I am not leaving yet. But I need you to understand that I am not going to keep doing this without something changing." He said, "I understand." She believed, looking at him, that he meant it. She also knew, in that careful, quiet, honest part of herself that had been growing for 3 years, that meaning something and acting on it were two very different things, and that she had extended him every possible benefit of the doubt already. She got up and rinsed her coffee cup. She got dressed. She went to work. Daniel sat at the kitchen table for a long time after she left, looking at nothing. For the first time in 3 years, he was thinking about something other than a building. He was thinking about what he had almost lost, what he might still lose. He was thinking about the woman who had stood on a bridge with him and said yes, and what he had done with that yes, and what it said about him that it had taken her empty chair at a birthday dinner for him to begin to see it. He stayed at the kitchen table for 20 minutes. Then he picked up his bag and went to work. Because old habits are not broken in a morning. Old habits are the structure we have lived in for so long they feel like the walls themselves, and taking them down, really taking them down, not just rearranging the furniture inside them, takes more than an intention. It takes work of a kind Daniel Hartley had never done in his life. The question was whether he was capable of it. The question was whether he even knew where to start. He did not go to therapy that day. He did not make a call or open a door. He went to his office and sat at his desk and drew lines on paper. But the morning had done something. Some small crack had opened in the wall. What came through it was not yet enough. But it was something. And something, in the landscape of Daniel Hartley's interior life, was more than there had been before. In the days that followed, Mara watched. She did not watch in a hostile way. She was not keeping score, not marking down his failures against a tally she was building. She was simply paying attention, because she had said what she needed, and now the next part of the story belonged to him. He had heard her. He had said he wanted to try, and she was watching to see whether trying looked any different from what the past 3 years had looked like, or whether it would be the same good intentions evaporating in the heat of his ordinary habits. The first week, he came home on time 3 nights out of 5. This was an improvement. She noticed but said nothing, because she did not want to reward the minimum as if it were extraordinary. The second week, he asked her how a manuscript she was working on was coming along, and when she answered, he kept the conversation going for 15 minutes, asking follow-up questions, responding to what she actually said rather than offering the half-presence she was used to. She felt something warm stir in her chest. She let herself feel it but did not attach too much to it. The third week, nothing particularly changed. He worked late twice. He was distracted at dinner. He looked at his phone while she was talking on a Thursday evening, and she saw herself, in that moment, from the outside, the woman pausing mid-sentence while her partner scrolled, the woman deciding whether to say something or let it go, and she let it go. And then she thought, I am back to doing the same calculation, the cost-benefit, the weighing of whether to speak versus the anticipated low return. She thought, this is not enough. She did not say this to him. Not yet. She held it alongside everything else she was holding, the conversation from the birthday morning, the genuine effort she thought she had seen in his face, the 3 weeks of partial improvement and 1 week of slide. She held it all, and she thought about what Nora had said months ago, and what Claire had said, and what her mother had said, and what she herself had said on a beach in February looking at the sea. She thought, I told him what I needed. I gave him one more chance because I loved him, and I believed, when he sat at that table and listened properly, that he meant what he said. And now I am watching. And what I am watching is someone trying just hard enough to keep things from breaking, but not trying hard enough to build something new. She thought, the difference between those two things matters enormously. She booked lunch with Nora on a Friday. They sat in a restaurant near Nora's office and ate and talked, and somewhere in the middle of the salad, Nora put down her fork and said, You have that look. What look? Said Mara. The look where you have already decided something and you are just building up to saying it out loud. Mara picked up her glass of water. She turned it slowly between her hands. I had a conversation with him, she said. The real one. The one I should have had a year ago. And? And he heard me. He really did. And then he tried. A little. And then the trying got a little less, and a little less, and now we are back to something very close to where we were before. She set the glass down. And I am sitting here thinking about the 3 years. The miscarriage, the birthday, the conversations that never went anywhere. And I am thinking, what exactly am I waiting for? Nora was quiet. I do not want to give up on him, Mara said. I want to say that clearly. This is not anger, and it is not a snap decision. I still love him, but I have started to understand something that I did not want to understand. She paused. He is not withholding from me on purpose. He genuinely does not have access to the things I need from him. And no amount of waiting on my part is going to give him access to them. You sound very certain, Nora said. I am not certain, Mara said. I am terrified, but I am clear, and I think clear is the best I am going to get. Nora reached across the table and put her hand over Mara's. Whatever you decide, she said, I am here. Mara nodded. She felt the warmth of that, the simple, unconditional warmth of a person who would be there regardless. She thought about how different that felt from the conditional, inconsistent warmth she had been trying to find in her own home. She thought about Daniel sitting at the kitchen table on the birthday morning, genuinely trying, genuinely meaning it, genuinely incapable of sustaining it. She thought, the saddest kind of love story is not the one where someone stops loving you. It is the one where they love you, and want to be what you need, and simply cannot. She paid for lunch. She and Nora hugged outside. She walked back toward the train station through the city she had lived in for 6 years, past the restaurant on the 14th floor, past the street where the gallery had been. She thought it was a clothing shop now, past the canal and the ordinary iron bridge. She stopped on the bridge. The same bridge. She had not planned to stop here. She just did. The water below was gray, not the dark, still water of a winter night, but daylight gray, moving. She looked at it for a moment. She thought about the ring. She looked at it on her hand. The simple band with the single stone that he had put there on a cold February night 3 years ago and she had said yes to with her whole heart. She stayed on the bridge for 5 minutes, then she walked on. She did not know, standing there, that everything was about to change. She had not planned the next step. She had not said the final word. But inside her, in the place where the stone had lived for 3 years, something was shifting, slowly, quietly, the way a foundation shifts when the pressure above it has finally exceeded what it was built to hold. Something was giving way, and the thing that was giving way was not her love. It was her willingness to wait any longer for that love to be enough. She had planned it carefully, which was the thing nobody would have guessed if they had seen her at that restaurant table, alone. Mara had made the reservation a month in advance, not the birthday reservation. She had made that kind of reservation before, always for them, always with him in mind, but this one differently. This one she had made because she wanted to go somewhere she had always wanted to go, with or without anyone else. A small French restaurant on the west side of the city, the kind of place with 16 tables and a handwritten menu and a wine list that took you 20 minutes to read because the descriptions were genuinely worth reading. She had walked past it twice in the past year and always thought, I should go there. Her birthday was not the occasion she had imagined it would be when she was a child. She had never been a person who needed a production, balloons and surprises and a crowd singing at her. What she wanted, and what she had wanted for as long as she could remember, was simply to feel known on that day. To feel that the people around her had paid attention, had taken in who she was, and were acknowledging that on this particular date, she had spent last year's birthday at a table alone in a different restaurant. She was not going to let that be the memory she added to the collection, so she had booked this table for herself, for 7:30 on a Tuesday, and she had told Daniel about it 3 weeks in advance, which she had not done last year. She had put it in the shared calendar. She had mentioned it at breakfast one morning while he was reading something on his phone. He had looked up. "Your birthday, right? Yes, I'll be there." She had nodded. She had not asked him to confirm again. She did not want to manage this the way she managed so many things, following up, reminding, making sure, doing the emotional labor of keeping another person accountable for the things they said they would do. She wanted, just once, for him to show up because he had remembered, because it mattered to him without being prodded. She got ready with care that evening, not because she was performing anything. There would be no audience for the care she took, or there might not be, but because it was her birthday and she had decided some time ago that she was going to show up for herself even when other people did not. She wore the dark green dress she had bought impulsively in January and never worn anywhere. She did her hair. She put on the earrings she loved. She stood in front of the mirror and she looked at herself for a moment, really looked, which was something she did not often do. She looked at the woman in the mirror, 32 years old, 3 years of something complicated behind her, the green dress and the good earrings and the expression of someone who has made a quiet decision, and she thought, "You are going to be all right." She did not know yet whether the evening would go well, but she believed the sentence she had just said to the mirror. She believed it in a way she had not believed it for some time. She took a cab. The restaurant was everything she had imagined, small and warm and smelling of something with butter and herbs. The host showed her to a table by the window. She had requested a window when she booked, because she liked watching people pass in the street, and brought her the menu and a small card that said "Happy Birthday" in neat handwriting, which she had not expected, and which caught her off guard for a moment. She ordered a glass of wine, a good one. She read the menu without rushing. At 7:45, Daniel had not arrived. She was not yet worried. He was sometimes late. Traffic, a call, one of the many operational delays that life throws up without warning. She ordered sparkling water alongside the wine, and she looked at the window and watched a couple argue lightly on the pavement outside, gesturing with their hands, and then laugh at something and keep walking. At 8, she checked her phone. No message. She ordered the starter. She ate it. It was excellent. A warm salad with hazelnuts and soft cheese and something lightly pickled underneath that gave the whole thing an unexpected edge. She thought, "I would tell Daniel about this ingredient and he would find it interesting for 30 seconds, and then he would check his phone." She thought, "That is not kind." She put her phone face down on the table. At 8:25, the text arrived. She looked at it. She read it. She put the phone back down. She looked at the window. The couple was gone. A man walked by with a small dog. A woman with red hair walked very fast with her head down, going somewhere with purpose. She looked at the glass of wine. She picked it up. She took a sip. She did not cry. She noted this, inside herself, as a significant piece of data. There was a time when a text like that on a night like this would have fractured something in her, and the fracture would have made her eyes fill, and she would have sat at this restaurant table holding herself together by sheer will. But she sat here now and she did not cry, and she did not feel fractured. She felt something else, something she had to sit with for a moment to identify. She felt clear. That was the word. Clear. The way the air is clear after a long rain. The way a road looks after you have driven through fog for hours and suddenly the fog lifts and you can see exactly where you are, and exactly what is in front of you. She was going to have to leave him. Not because of this text, not because of this specific evening, which was simply the last in a long line of evenings, but because she had finally, sitting at this table with a glass of wine and a menu written by hand and the honest quiet of her own company, run out of reasons to stay. She had tried everything she had. She had given him every version of herself. Patient, direct, accommodating, firm, open, raw. She had told him what she needed. She had hoped and waited and adjusted and hoped again. She had loved him with as much as she had, and she had stayed in the shape of his life even when his life did not seem to have room for the shape of hers. She thought about the 3 promises, not with anger this time, just with the clear-eyed recognition of what they had been and what they had become. He had promised to be present. He was absent more often than not just physically but in the deeper way, the way that leaves you alone even when someone is sitting beside you. He had promised to communicate. They had fewer real conversations now than they had in the first month. She had stopped initiating them because they cost her more than she could afford. He had promised she would always know she was the person he was coming home to. She knew he came home, but she did not always feel like the reason. 3 promises, 3 years, 3 versions of the same quiet, mounting, undeniable evidence. She ordered her main course. She ate it. It was the best piece of fish she had eaten in years. She told the waiter this and he beamed at her, and said the chef would be very pleased to hear it. She ordered the small chocolate dessert because it was her birthday and she could. She sat at the table until almost 10. She was not sitting there to make a point. She was sitting there because she was not in a hurry to leave, and because the restaurant was comfortable, and the wine was good, and she had decided, at some point between the starter and the main course, that she was going to spend this evening exactly as she wanted to spend it, rather than rushing through it with grief. It was her birthday. She was 32. She was wearing a green dress and sitting at a good table in a restaurant she had always wanted to try. And outside the window, the city was alive with ordinary life. And she was a woman who had given a great deal to a relationship that had not given enough back. And she was choosing, tonight, to sit with herself instead of rushing to a grief that would not get her anywhere. She paid the bill. She left a generous tip for the waiter who had brought her the birthday card. She put on her coat. She stepped outside. The night was cool and clear. She stood on the pavement for a moment, breathing. The city hummed around her. She did not feel broken. She thought she would feel broken. When this moment finally came, when the clarity arrived and the truth of it settled in, she had imagined it as a shattering. What it actually felt like was the opposite, a gathering. Like pieces of herself that had been scattered and waiting were slowly, quietly, finding their way back. She walked for a while instead of getting a cab. She walked through streets she liked, past buildings she had always noticed, past lit windows with glimpses of other lives behind them. She thought about what came next, not the logistics. Those would come, in time, in the careful and organized way she approached everything. She thought about what it meant to be a person who chose herself. She had not chosen herself in a very long time. She had been choosing patience, choosing faith in another person, choosing the version of the future she had hoped was still possible. Now she was choosing something different. When she got home, the apartment was dark. Daniel was not yet back. She changed out of the green dress and hung it up. She washed her face. She made a cup of tea and sat at the kitchen table. The same table where she had sat on the birthday morning and told him the honest truth. And she sat with what she had decided. She was not angry. She could not be angry at a man for being unable to be what she needed, any more than you could be angry at a wall for being a wall. She was sad. She was sad in a way that was real and full and would take time. But she was also, and she was not going to argue herself out of this, relieved. The kind of relief you feel when you have been carrying something very heavy for a long time and you finally set it down. Daniel came home at 11. He came into the kitchen. He saw her at the table. "Hi," he said. "Hi," she said. He looked at her. His face did the thing it did sometimes, a slight contraction, a reading of the atmosphere, the particular alertness of someone who knows something is wrong but does not know how to step toward it. "I'm sorry about tonight," he said. "The call went on and I know," she said. "I got your text." Silence. "Did you go?" he said. "Yes," she said. "It was a beautiful restaurant. I had a really good meal." He nodded slowly. He was trying to read her and she could see him trying, and she felt a tenderness toward him that surprised her with its gentleness, given everything. She did not feel rage. She felt something closer to the feeling you have when you understand something painful clearly and completely, and the understanding takes the heat out of it. "Daniel," she said, "I need us to have a real conversation. Not tonight. I am tired, and I want to be clear-headed when we talk. But soon, tomorrow, or the next day. And I need you to know, going into it, that I am not okay. That I have not been okay for a long time. And that what I say to you in that conversation is going to be the last version of this I am able to give you." He stood very still. "Okay," he said. His voice was quiet. "Okay," she said. She finished her tea. She washed the cup. She went to bed. She lay in the dark and she breathed steadily, and she thought about the green dress hanging in the wardrobe and the birthday card from the waiter and the piece of fish that had been the best she had eaten in years. She thought about sitting at a table alone and finding that she was better company for herself than she had expected. She thought, "I am going to be all right." She believed it completely this time. And somewhere in the apartment, Daniel was sitting in the living room in the dark, and for the first time in 3 years, he was afraid of losing her. Not because she had threatened him, but because he had heard, in the measured quietness of her voice, something he had never heard before. An ending approaching. And he had no idea how to stop it. The next day passed in the specific tension of 2 people living in a shared space with a large unspoken thing between them. Mara went to work. She sat at her desk and read through a manuscript she had been working on for 2 weeks. A novel about a woman who builds a new life in a city she does not know, which she had been finding quietly meaningful, for reasons she had not examined too closely. She marked up chapters. She had a brief meeting with her supervisor. She ate lunch at her desk because she needed the afternoon quiet. Owen knocked on her door at 3 and put a small slice of birthday cake on her desk without saying anything. She looked up. He held up a hand. "I know it is a day late," he said, "but the bakery near my house was closed yesterday." He left without waiting for a response. She looked at the cake. It was lemon, her favorite, which she had mentioned once in passing months ago. She looked at the door through which he had just walked, and she felt something in her chest that was warm and specific, and entirely separate from whatever was happening in her relationship. The feeling of being seen by someone who had simply paid attention. She ate the cake slowly. She went back to her manuscript. On the train home, she thought about what she was going to say to Daniel. She had told herself, tomorrow or the next day, and she held herself to things she told herself. She was disciplined in that way. She did not like to let commitments dissolve, even internal ones. She thought about how to begin and what to include and how to say the most essential things without turning it into something defensive or cruel. Because cruelty was not her intention. Her intention was the truth, plain and whole, and said in the spirit of two people who had tried something real and reached the end of what it could be. She let herself into the apartment at 6:15. Daniel was already home, which was unusual. He was sitting in the living room, not working, not looking at his phone. He was just sitting. She put her bag down. She took off her coat. "Tonight?" she said. "If you are ready," he said. She was ready. She sat in the chair across from the sofa, not beside him, because she needed a little distance. She needed to be able to look at him properly. She needed to be a person having a real conversation, rather than two halves of a couple pressed together on a cushion. She looked at him for a moment before she started. She looked at his face, the familiar lines of it, the way he held himself, the quality of his attention right now, which was, to his credit, the most present she had seen it in months. She looked at the man she had loved for 3 years, and she took a breath. "I am going to leave," she said. "I want you to know that I have not made this decision lightly, or quickly, or in the middle of an emotion. I have been here with you for 3 years, fully, and I have tried everything I knew how to try, and I love you. I want you to know that is true, and it does not change what I have decided." He was very still. "I cannot keep waiting," she said, "for something to change that does not seem to be capable of changing. Not because you are a bad person. You are not a bad person. But I need someone who can be emotionally present in the way I need, and I do not believe, after 3 years, after the conversations we have had, after everything, that you are able to be that person. Not for me, maybe not for anyone. I think this is something that would take a long time to change in you, and I think you would need to want it to change for reasons that have nothing to do with keeping me, and I cannot be the reason you finally do the work. That is not fair to either of us." She stopped. She had said the main things. She let the silence do what it needed to do. Daniel looked at the floor. He looked at his hands. He looked up at her. His face was doing something she had not seen it do before. Something cracked open. Something raw. Something that might have been grief working through a wall it had never quite managed to break. "I know I have failed you," he said. "I know it." "I believe you know it now," she said. "But knowing it now after 3 years is not enough for me to stay." He nodded slowly. She saw his jaw tighten, and she knew he was holding something in. Emotion, argument, the urge to say something that would change this. And she watched him hold it in, and she thought, even now, at the most important moment, the instinct is to contain rather than express. The habit is so deep it runs in his blood. "Is there anything I can say?" he asked. "I do not think so," she said. "Not tonight. And not because I do not want to hear it, but because I have heard things before, and things have not changed, and I am not willing to let hope make me stay any longer than I should." He nodded again. He did not argue. She had expected, in some part of herself, that he would argue, that the ending would come with raised voices or tears, or a last-minute reaching of the kind that is cinematic and human and sometimes, in other stories, actually works. But it did not come with any of that. He sat very quietly and listened to her, and when she was done he sat with it, and then he said, "I think you are right." She had not expected those 4 words. She looked at him. "I think you are right," he said again. "And I am sorry. I am sorry that I could not be what you needed when I had the chance. I am sorry I wasted the chance." She felt tears then, not many, and not the desperate kind, but a few, coming from the part of her that had loved him sincerely and was grieving sincerely. She let them come. She did not apologize for them. They sat together in the living room for a while after that, not talking much, Not crying much. Just two people in the same space at the end of something real. She had booked a viewing for an apartment 3 days ago. She had not told him. She had done it quietly, the way she did most of her decisive things, without drama and without announcement. And she was going to look at it on Saturday, and if it was right, she was going to take it. She did not tell him this yet. There was time. The next steps had their own shape, and they would unfold in their own order. Tonight was enough. Tonight she had said the thing she needed to say, and he had heard it, and they had sat together in the kind of quiet that only comes after honesty. She went to bed at 10. He stayed in the living room. She lay on her side of the bed, the side she had always slept on, the side that had its own warm indent in the mattress, and she thought about the apartment she had looked at online. East-facing windows, good light in the morning, a tree visible from the kitchen. She thought, a tree. I would like a tree. She thought, I am going to be okay. She thought, no, not okay, better than okay. She breathed, in and out. The night was quiet. For the first time in 3 years, the stone in her chest was not there. She had put it down, without drama, without anyone watching. In the middle of an ordinary evening in the home she was leaving, she had set it down, and she was not going to pick it up again. She found the apartment on a Saturday morning at 10:30, and she knew within the first 3 minutes of standing in it that it was right. Not because it was perfect. It was not perfect. The kitchen was smaller than she would have chosen. The bathroom needed regrouting along the bottom of the shower wall. The second room, too small to be a bedroom, not quite right for an office, was an odd shape, too narrow on one side, that would require some thought. She noticed all of this. She was a person who noticed small things. It was a professional skill that had become a personal one. But the windows faced east, as the listing had promised, and the morning light was coming through them in long, clean lines, falling across the wooden floor in the specific way that light only does in early spring. And there was a tree visible from the kitchen window, a proper one, not the narrow city tree from her old apartment, but a full, generous tree, with new leaves that had just opened, and were the particular pale green of things that are very recently alive. She stood at the kitchen window looking at the tree for a moment, while the landlord waited politely behind her. She thought, yes. She took the apartment. She did not tell Daniel immediately. She came home to the apartment they still shared. The process of leaving took its own time, even after the conversation, even after the decision had been made. And she put her keys on the hook and took her coat off, and she could hear him moving around in the study, the familiar sound of his feet, and she went to the kitchen and made tea and sat down. She had thought, before she saw the new apartment, that leaving would feel like a rupture, like something being forcibly removed from a place it had grown into. She had braced for that, the way you brace for something that is going to hurt. What she felt instead was closer to the feeling of setting down a bag you have been carrying for so long you had forgotten it was in your hand. The weight had been so constant, she had adjusted to it so thoroughly, and now that it was lifting, not all at once, but in the specific and practical sequence of deposit paid, lease signed, Saturday to look at, 2 weeks to move, she could feel, for the first time, what it had been like to carry it. You could only understand the full weight of something once you put it down. That was another thing she had not known about herself until Daniel. She told him that evening. She sat across the kitchen table from him, the same table, always this table, where all the important things had been said, and she told him she had signed a lease and that she would be out within the month. He nodded. He had, in the days since their conversation, been quiet in a way that was different from his usual quiet. His old quiet was the quiet of someone sealed off, turned inward, absent from the room. This quiet was different. This was the quiet of someone sitting with something uncomfortable, and not running from it. She noticed the difference. She noted it. She did not let it change anything. Is there anything you need me to do? He said. I will let you know, she said. He nodded. That was how it went, mostly, without arguments, without ugliness, without the kind of prolonged mutual unraveling that some breakups require. He had heard her. He had not tried to reverse what could not be reversed. She did not know whether this was respect or resignation, or some combination of the two, and she decided it did not matter. What mattered was that it was happening cleanly, which was, she thought, perhaps the only truly clean thing that had ever passed between them. Her sister Nora came over on a Thursday evening with boxes, which was exactly the right thing to do. She brought boxes and wine and did not offer commentary unless asked, and they packed the things that were unambiguously Mara's, the books, the framed print from the market, the kitchen tools she had brought from her previous flat, the blanket she had owned since she was 24, things that had been hers before him and would be hers after. Daniel was in the study while they packed. Mara could hear the faint sound of his music through the door. She had always known his music choices. Classical during work hours, something quieter in the evenings, occasionally the kind of low jazz that meant he was in a reflective mood. She listened to it for a moment, through the study door, while Nora wrapped something in newspaper. She thought, I know so much about you. I know your rhythms and your moods and the exact way you hold a pen and how you take your coffee and what your voice sounds like when you are genuinely excited about something versus when you are performing interest. I know all of this, and none of it was enough to build what we needed. She taped up a box. She kept going. Claire called that weekend, and Mara told her about the apartment and the tree and the lease, and Claire was quiet for a moment and then said, How do you actually feel? Strange, Mara said. Good, sad, relieved. All at the same time. That sounds right, Claire said. I keep waiting to fall apart, Mara said, and I have not. I thought I would. Maybe you did your falling apart earlier, Claire said. Over 3 years, a little at a time. Maybe you ran out of it before the end. Mara thought about this. She thought about all the nights she had lain in the dark not sleeping, about the miscarriage and the grief she had held largely alone, about the birthday in the restaurant last year, and the birthday in the restaurant this year, about the conversations that had bounced off him and come back to her intact and useless. She thought about all the small, private fallings apart she had managed alone, in the bathroom, in the spare room, in the kitchen while the tap ran. Yes, she said, I think that is exactly right. Moving day was a Saturday in late April. She had hired a small van and 2 men to carry the heavy things, and Nora came again, and her colleague Owen appeared unannounced at 9 in the morning with a box of croissants, and said he could carry things and had a car if needed. She was moved by this in a way she did not entirely expect. The simple fact of people showing up. Daniel helped too. He carried boxes without being asked, quietly, methodically, in the way he did all practical things. She watched him at one point carrying a stack of books down the stairs, his back to her, steady and careful, and she felt a complicated wave of something that she could not fully name. Affection maybe, of the kind you feel for someone you are releasing. Sorrow for the version of the life she had hoped for and was now letting go. A certain tenderness toward him that did not require her to stay. By 2 in the afternoon, most of it was done. She stood in the old apartment, in the middle of the empty living room, and she looked around at the walls. Their walls, in the sense that she had lived here, that her life had been arranged inside these surfaces for 3 years. The nail holes where her frames had hung. The slight scuff near the door she had always meant to fix. The window with the narrow city tree outside, its branches bare in winter and full in spring, the tree she had watched go around once and almost twice. Daniel came and stood in the doorway. She turned around. They looked at each other. She had thought she would know what to say in this moment. She had imagined it several times, the final moment in the apartment, and in her imagining she always said something that was true and complete, and worthy of everything they had been to each other. But standing here now, with the room empty around her, she found that there was nothing perfect to say. There was just the truth, simple and plain. I hope you are happy, she said. I mean that. He looked at her for a long moment. I hope you are too, he said. I think you will be. She nodded. She picked up the last bag. She walked out. She did not look back, not because it was dramatic not to, but because she was already thinking forward. About the new apartment, about the east-facing windows and the morning light and the tree, about the spare room with the odd narrow wall that she was going to figure out, because she was good at figuring things out. About what she was going to cook for dinner tonight in her own kitchen, alone, which felt like a freedom rather than a loss. The van pulled away from the curb. She watched the street through the window as they drove. The city moved around her, indifferent and continuous, doing what it always did. The new apartment was on the 3rd floor. There was no lift, which she had known going in and decided was fine. The climb was good. The light at the top was worth it. She opened the door with the new key, her key, just hers, and stepped inside. The east windows were pouring light across the wooden floor. The tree outside the kitchen window had grown another few leaves since Saturday. The odd narrow room was exactly as odd as she remembered. Nora and Owen carried things up the stairs behind her. She stood in the middle of the main room and she looked at the space, the possibilities of it, the emptiness that was waiting for her to fill it with her own choices, and she thought, this is mine. Not mine the way a possession is owned. Mine the way a life is yours when you are living it on your own terms. She made tea before they started unpacking because it seemed important to do something ordinary first, something that said, this is a home, it begins with tea. She found the kettle in the first box she opened, which felt like a small sign. She filled it at the kitchen sink and looked at the tree while it boiled. They ordered pizza at 6. They sat on boxes in the floor of the living room because the furniture was not arranged yet, and they ate pizza, and Nora told a story from their childhood that made Mara laugh so hard her eyes watered. Owen said he was glad she was here, in this place, doing this. She said she was too. Later, when Nora and Owen had gone and the apartment was finally just hers, she sat in the kitchen with a last cup of tea and looked out at the tree, which was dark now, just a shape against the sodium orange city sky. She thought about the past 3 years. She let herself think about them honestly, without softening or sharpening, just as they had been. She thought about Daniel, his quiet, and his coldness, and his genuine effort, and his inevitable fall back into old habits, and the man she had loved before she understood what love required of both people to survive. She thought, I do not regret loving him. I do not regret staying as long as I did. I regret that it did not become what I hoped it would, but I do not regret trying. She thought, I am 32 and I have the rest of everything, and tonight, I am sitting in a kitchen with good light, and a tree outside the window, and people in my life who showed up without being asked. She thought, that is not nothing. She thought, that is quite a lot actually. She finished her tea. She turned off the kitchen light. She went to her bedroom, the one she had set up first because she was practical and because a person needed somewhere to sleep before she needed anything else, and she pulled back the covers and lay down. The room was quiet. Outside, very faintly, she could hear the city. She had always liked that sound, the low, continuous hum of a place that never fully stops. She closed her eyes. She slept, really slept, deeply and early, in the way she had not slept in a very long time, and she did not dream of anything. And in another part of the city, Daniel stood in the apartment that was now only his, and the rooms around him were quieter than he had expected, and the quiet was a different kind than he was used to, and he stood there for a long time before he could bring himself to go to bed. She woke the next morning at 7, which was later than she usually woke. The east light was already in the room, soft and slanted, reaching across the floor and touching the edge of her bed. She lay still for a moment, orienting herself, cataloging the sounds, traffic from 2 streets over, a bird she did not recognize, the particular creak of a new building settling around her. New building, new sounds, new morning. She got up, she made coffee. She stood at the kitchen window in the morning light and looked at the tree, which was beginning to be fully itself now, leaves no longer hesitant but open, filling the branches, the whole thing a generous and uncomplicated green. She thought, good morning. She said it quietly to the tree. She was aware this was slightly absurd. She said it anyway. The first month in the new apartment was not easy. She had not expected it to be easy. She had known that the relief of the decision and the lightness of the moving day would eventually settle into something more complicated, and it did. She cried, sometimes. Not often, and not in the way she had cried during the worst months with Daniel, that hollow, depleted crying that came from exhaustion and disappointment, but a different kind. The kind that comes from genuine grief for something real. She had loved him. The ending of that, even when it was right, even when it was necessary, came with loss. She let herself feel the loss. She did not try to skip over it or redirect it into something more productive. She sat with it in the evenings when it came and she let it be what it was, and then when it passed she got up and did ordinary things and the ordinary things helped. She called her mother on Sundays. She went to lunch with Claire when Claire came to town. She had dinners with Nora and was honestly glad to have her sister close. She kept up her lunches with Owen, who had become one of those friendships that quietly becomes indispensable without you realizing until it is simply there, fully formed, solid as furniture. She worked, and she worked well. There was a manuscript that came across her desk that spring that she loved unreservedly. A novel about a woman returning to herself after a long absence from herself, told in precise and unsentimental prose, and she worked on it with the kind of care that only comes when you understand the subject from the inside. She championed it at the editorial meeting. She wrote the report that went to the acquisitions team with language she had thought about for days. The book went through. She was proud of this in a specific and uncomplicated way. She did not date. It was not a resolution. She did not make that kind of formal declaration to herself, but the timing was simply not right, and she knew her own rhythms well enough by now to trust them. There would be time. There was no hurry. She was 32 and she was, for perhaps the first time in several years, genuinely happy in her own company, and that felt like something to stay inside for a while before looking for a door. She took a pottery class. She had mentioned this to Claire once, months ago, maybe a year ago, as something she had always wanted to try. She had said it the way you say things you do not quite believe you will ever actually do, in the register of pleasant fantasy rather than real intention. But she lived 3 blocks from a ceramics studio that had an evening class on Tuesdays, and one evening she walked past and looked at the sign and thought, why not Tuesday? She was terrible at it initially. Her first bowl collapsed twice. Her second bowl was technically a bowl, but it looked, as her instructor kindly put it, very organic. She did not mind being terrible at it. She was not used to being a beginner at things, and she found, to her surprise, that she liked it. Liked the learning curve, liked the physicality of it, liked the way it required complete attention, and therefore gave her an hour a week where she was thinking about nothing except clay and what her hands were doing. She kept going. She got better slowly. By the end of May, she had made something that was genuinely recognizable as a vessel. Not beautiful, not especially skilled, but a real shape with function, made by her own hands, that she could fill with something and it would hold. She put it on the kitchen windowsill. She looked at it sometimes when she was making coffee. She did not know why she found it as satisfying as she did, but she found it very satisfying. Her friend from university, a woman named Polly who lived 2 hours away by train and who she had not seen enough of in recent years, came to stay for a weekend in June. Polly had known Mara since she was 18. Polly knew her in the way that only very old friends do. Not perfectly, not completely, but in the particular way of having been there for the formation, having seen the early drafts. Polly walked around the new apartment and said, "This place is very you." Mara looked around at it. The books arranged how she liked them. The green dress hanging on the back of the bedroom door because she had not found the right occasion for it yet, and she was not going to rush one. The pottery bowl on the windowsill. The plant she had bought on a Saturday impulse, a fig tree, small but promising, in a terracotta pot she had also made herself, which had a slightly uneven rim but was structurally sound. "Yes," she said, "I suppose it is." Polly settled onto the sofa and looked at her. "How are you, really?" "Better," Mara said. "Much better. In a way that does not have anything to do with being over it. I am still in the middle of it, still grieving it sometimes, but better underneath all of that." Polly nodded. "You look different," she said. "Not older. More like yourself, actually." Mara thought about that. "I think I might be," she said. They cooked dinner together that evening, the two of them in the small kitchen, trading the chopping board and moving around each other the way old friends do without needing to negotiate it. They ate at the kitchen table, Mara's table, the right size for her space, and they talked for hours about everything and nothing, and the city outside the window did what cities do, and the tree was dark against the late summer sky, and Mara felt, sitting there in the life she had made for herself, something she wanted to remember. She was enough. As a person, in this space, with these people in her life, she was enough. She did not need to be validated by someone else's consistency in order to exist with confidence. She had always known this, theoretically, the way you know things before experience teaches them to your body. Now she knew it in the deeper way, the way that stays. 6 months after moving out, Mara's life had taken on a shape she recognized as her own. She had not looked for this shape. She had not drawn a plan for it or set intentions or made a list of what her rebuilt life was going to look like. She had simply woken up each morning in her east-facing bedroom and gone about her days in the honest and careful way she went about everything, and the shape had emerged naturally, the way water finds its level. She woke at 6:30 usually, earlier in summer when the light came in fast, later in winter when the dark lingered and the bedroom held its warmth. She made coffee before doing anything else, stood at the kitchen window with it, looked at the tree. This ritual had become necessary in a way she had not planned. She was not a person who had ever been precious about morning routines, but something about the 15 minutes of quiet, coffee, window, tree, the slow arrival of the day, had become the thing that set everything else in order. She had needed steadiness. She had found it in a cup and a view. Her mornings were hers, nobody else's. This was, she had come to understand, a significant part of what had changed. For 3 years her mornings had been organized around someone else's presence or absence. She had woken calibrating his mood. She had moved through the kitchen on the particular frequency of, is he having a good day or a difficult one? She had been so accustomed to this that she had not noticed it was what she was doing. You do not notice the background hum until it stops. The silence of her own mornings had taken some adjusting to. For the first few weeks it had felt almost too quiet, the way a room feels after a long conversation when everyone has gone home. But she had sat inside it and breathed and let her own thoughts be the ones that filled the space. And over time, the quiet had become companionable rather than empty. She had started to enjoy her own thoughts again, to find them interesting, worth following. She had spent a long time in a relationship where her inner life had been turned mostly inward, tending itself quietly without display, because there had not been anywhere to bring it. Now she brought it back to herself. She found it had been there all along, patient, waiting for her to come back. She took long walks on Saturday mornings, not fast, purposeful walks. She did enough purposeful movement in the week, but slow ones, through different parts of the city, not always with a destination. She had started this in May, 2 weeks after the move, when a warm Saturday arrived and she did not have any particular plan and found herself putting on her shoes and going outside. She had walked for 2 hours without meaning to. She had discovered 3 streets she had never been down in 6 years of living in this city. She had stopped at a bakery she did not know existed and bought an almond pastry that was so good she stood outside eating it on the pavement before she was even around the corner. She had gone back to that bakery 12 times since. She knew the woman who worked the counter on Saturdays by name now. Her name was Iris. Iris had strong opinions about croissant lamination, and Mara had learned, over 12 weeks of Saturday visits, more about the butter content of French pastry than she had ever expected to know. These were the textures of her new life. Small, specific, accumulated. They did not look dramatic. They did not look like a transformation. From the outside, if you described them, woman walks on Saturdays, goes to a bakery, takes pottery classes, reads manuscripts at a desk, calls her sister on Thursdays, it would sound like an ordinary life with nothing particularly significant about it. But from the inside it felt like recovering something she had not known was gone, the particular rightness of being in your life rather than beside it, of taking up the space you are entitled to take up. She had stopped apologizing to herself. This was perhaps the most significant change, and the most difficult to describe. For 3 years she had been in a quiet, constant negotiation with her own needs, minimizing them, reframing them, telling herself they were too large or too demanding, or not quite fair. She had internalized, without entirely realizing it, a version of herself that required less. She had made herself smaller so that the gap between what she needed and what she was receiving would feel less painful. She had not noticed she was doing this until she stopped. Stopping felt like releasing a breath she had held for a very long time. Work was going well. The book she had championed in the spring, the novel about a woman returning to herself, had been picked up and was heading for publication the following year, and she had been asked to oversee the editing process, which was a professional endorsement that mattered to her. She liked the author, a woman in her late 40s named Alice who wrote with the specific precision of someone who had thought about things for a long time before committing any of them to paper. They communicated by email and occasional phone call, and there was a quiet mutual respect between them that Mara found nourishing. Alice sent edits back with thoughtful responses, and sometimes a brief note about something unrelated, a recipe, an article she had found interesting, and Mara wrote back in kind. It was a working friendship of the kind that does not pretend to be more than it is, which was exactly right. Owen had become a regular fixture, not in any romantic way, that was not the shape of it, and she was clear about that, and so was he, but in the way of a friendship that has become one of your constants. He appeared for lunch 2 or 3 times a week. He left a book on her desk one morning that he thought she would like, and she had liked it very much. He told her difficult things honestly, and she did the same for him, which was the basis of all the friendships that had lasted in her life. She thought sometimes that she had learned something from 3 years with Daniel about what she needed from people. Straightforwardness, reliability, the kind of presence that was present. Owen was all of those things and asked nothing in return except the same. She had not spoken to Daniel since moving out. This was not a deliberate policy. She had not made a rule about it or promised herself silence. It had simply turned out that way. They had exchanged brief practical messages in the first 2 weeks, about a utility bill and about collecting a final bag he had found in the spare room. And then there had been nothing. And the nothing had gone on long enough that it had become its own kind of answer. She thought about him sometimes, not with longing, not in the way that made her chest tight, but with the particular feeling you have towards someone you have known deeply and no longer see. A complicated tenderness, an awareness of everything she understood about him that she had not understood when she first met him. The way he held a pen, the music he listened to when he was thinking, the precise sound of his voice when he was genuinely engaged. She thought about him without wishing she was back. That was the distinction. You could know someone fully and still know they were not right for you. You could carry affection and still be where you needed to be. Both things could be true. She had learned in the past 6 months that life was full of truths that did not cancel each other out. She had not made any particular effort to stop thinking about him, and the thoughts had faded naturally the way they do when you are actually building something forward rather than trying to talk yourself into being fine. She was not trying to be fine. She just was, increasingly, genuinely fine, better than fine, on the good days. In September she signed up for a second pottery class, a more advanced one, Saturday mornings, in a different studio. She had become attached to the process. There was something in it that matched a particular need in her. the requirement of full attention, the tangible result, the way a mistake with clay is not permanent but is workable, the way the material responds to pressure with memory. She liked that things kept their shapes when given the right conditions. She liked that skill, practiced honestly, showed. She made a bowl that was actually beautiful in October. She did not notice it immediately. She was working on the rim, checking it with her hands, and her instructor came and stood beside her and said simply, "That's it." She looked at it, really looked, and she saw that it was. It was not complicated. It was a simple bowl, well made, with a rim that was even, and a curve that was right, and a glaze she had chosen herself, a deep greenish blue that reminded her of the canal on winter evenings. She fired it and took it home and put it on the kitchen table where she could see it from everywhere. Her mother came to stay for a weekend in November and saw the bowl and picked it up and turned it over in her hands. "You made this?" she said. "I did," Mara said. Her mother set it down. She looked at her daughter. Mara knew that look, the comprehensive maternal look that takes in more than it appears to. Her mother said, "You are happy." Mara thought about this. It was not a question, but she answered it as one. "Yes," she said. "I think I actually am." Her mother nodded in the specific way of a person who had been hoping to hear something and had been patient about it. "Good," she said. They had dinner that evening, and her mother told a long story about the people down the street that was funny, and probably exaggerated, and Mara laughed until she leaned over the table. She thought, this is what it feels like to be in your life, not watching it from a slight distance, not half inside it and half in some other story about what it should have been, just in it, at a table, eating good food, laughing at a story, genuinely here. She washed up after dinner while her mother sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea. Through the window the tree was bare now. November had taken its leaves, but the shape of it was still good. Strong branches, a good trunk. She liked it in all its forms. "Can I ask you something?" her mother said. Mara turned from the window. "Of course. Do you miss him?" She considered the question honestly. "Sometimes," she said. "Not the relationship, but parts of him, the way he looked at things, the attention he gave to things he cared about." She paused. "I miss who I thought he might become, but I do not miss waiting for him to become it." Her mother nodded. "That is a very healthy answer. It took a while to get there," Mara said. She turned back to the window, the bare tree, the night behind it. She did not know what was coming next. She was not looking around the corner. For the first time in a very long time, she was simply here, in this kitchen, in this apartment, in this life that was hers. It was enough. It was, frankly, more than enough. It was exactly right. She did not fill the weekends the way she had once filled them, rushing toward things, managing schedules, accommodating someone else's needs at the expense of her own. She had begun, in these months of quiet reconstruction, to be more deliberate about what she said yes to and why, not selectively in a cold or calculating way, but in the honest sense of only spending herself on things that were actually worth the spending. This had turned out to be easier than she had expected once she started doing it. The cleaner your understanding of what matters to you, the easier it becomes to recognize what does not. She said yes to the ceramics class, to the Saturday walks, to dinners with Nora and lunches with Owen and phone calls with Claire and Polly. She said yes to the author Alice's suggestion that they meet in person when Alice came to the city for a reading, and over coffee they talked about the novel, and also about everything else, and Mara left feeling sharpened, the way a good conversation makes you feel, like something that had been slightly blunted has been brought back to its edge. She said no, politely but clearly, to the colleague who invited her to a party she knew she would not enjoy. She said no to the weekend trip that her university friends were organizing that fell in the middle of a week she needed for herself. She said no to the habit she had been told was self-care, but that did not actually make her feel anything. The bubble baths, the scented candles, the curated wellness that looked good in photographs but left her feeling vaguely hollow. What made her feel well was the tree and the walks and the clay and the books and the honest conversations with people who knew her. She had begun to trust herself. This, she thought, was the part that was hardest to explain to someone who had not been through it. You can lose your trust in yourself gradually, inside a relationship that does not reflect you back accurately, and you do not notice the losing because it happens alongside the loving, and they are so tangled together that you cannot see one clearly without the other. But once you are out, once the space is yours and the quiet is yours and the choices are yours, you start to see yourself more clearly. And what you often find is that you were more capable than you had believed. That your instincts, the ones you had been second-guessing for years, were correct. That the version of yourself you had been managing down was the actual version. The right size, the right temperature, the right amount of need. She was the right amount of need. This was something she had learned. Her needs had not been excessive. She had wanted to be seen and heard and consistently present in someone's life. She had wanted a partner who showed up. These were not outrageous things. They were ordinary and reasonable and human. She had spent a long time believing otherwise, and the distance from that belief was one of the better things about where she stood now. December arrived. The city put its lights up. She went with Nora to a Christmas market on a weekend evening, and they drank warm spiced apple juice and looked at handmade things, and Nora bought an outrageously large wreath and made Mara carry it home on the train, which caused a minor incident in the carriage that they laughed about for 20 minutes. She bought a small thing for herself, a ring. Not an engagement ring, not anything with the weight of that. Just a simple silver ring for the middle finger of her right hand that she liked the look of, and that cost 40 pounds from a woman at the market who made jewelry from recycled materials. She put it on right there at the stall and looked at it and thought, yes, that. She was not thinking about Daniel. She was thinking about whether to have another cup of the apple juice. She had the second cup. It was very good. On Christmas Eve, she called her parents. She was going there for Christmas, which she did not always do, but this year had felt right. She had wanted to be in her childhood home with the people who had known her longest, in the place where she had first become the person she was. She spoke to her father for 20 minutes, and he asked her about work, and she told him, and he was proud of her in the quiet, consistent way he was proud of everything she did. She spoke to her mother for longer, about everything and nothing, the kind of call that whines and doubles back and doesn't really go anywhere, except deeper into the warmth of the relationship. After she hung up, she made herself a simple dinner, pasta, a good sauce she had made on Sunday and kept in the fridge, the kind of thing you make when it is just for you and you want it to be good without being an event. She ate at the kitchen table with a book propped open beside the plate. Outside the window, the tree was bare and still. The city was quieter than usual, people having gone home, the streets settling into their holiday stillness. She thought, a year ago I was sitting at a birthday dinner alone in a restaurant and deciding to change my life. She thought, a year makes a remarkable difference when you are honest with yourself. She was not the same woman who had sat at that table. Not fundamentally different. Her values were the same, her character the same, the things she cared about the same. But she had moved back inside herself. She was present in her own life again, fully, without the portion of herself that had been perpetually occupied with someone else's unavailability. She had not been looking for what came next. She was genuinely not in a hurry. She was here, in this apartment, at this table, in this life, and it was enough. She cleared her plate. She rinsed it. She went to the sofa with her book. She read until 11. She went to bed. The room was dark and quiet, and hers. She thought, next year. She did not finish the thought. Next year stretched ahead, open and undetermined and without any particular shape yet. She was not afraid of that. She was, in fact, interested in it, curious about it in the way you are curious about something that is not yet decided what it will be. She closed her eyes. She slept easily, deeply, as she had been sleeping since April, as she had not slept in years before that. Outside the window, the bare tree stood in the cold December dark and held its shape, all the way down to its roots. Daniel Hartley sat in a chair in a room he had never expected to sit in front of a man he had never expected to need, and he did not know how to begin. The room was small and neutral, not aggressively therapeutic. No potted palms, no box of tissues prominently displayed, no prints on the wall designed to suggest calm. Just a room, 2 chairs, a low table with a glass of water on it. A man named Philip who had the particular quality of complete attention that Daniel had, in the first session, found deeply uncomfortable and had, by the third, begun to recognize as a skill he had not previously understood was possible. He had gone to Philip in September, 5 months after Mara left. Not immediately after. He had needed those 5 months. He had needed to sit in the apartment with its different quality of silence and begin to understand what that silence was showing him. He had needed to go through a period of telling himself he was fine, that relationships end and people move on and he would move on too. And he had needed to discover that this particular story he was telling himself was not landing the way his stories usually did. He was not fine. He had not been fine for a long time, and the leaving of Mara had done something that nothing had managed to do before. It had made the space around the not fine large enough that he could not ignore it anymore. He had not cried when she left. He had not cried the week after. He had gone to work and had the meetings and drawn the drawings and managed everything the way he always managed everything. He had seen his friends. He had eaten properly. From the outside, he had looked entirely functional. Inside, a low and constant hum that he could not name and could not turn off. A question that kept arriving and had no satisfactory answer. Not why did she leave. He understood why she left. She had told him clearly, and he had heard clearly. The question was, why could he not be what she needed? And underneath that, darker and harder to look at, was there something wrong with him? Not wrong in a dramatic or clinical sense, but wrong in the sense of missing, absent, built without a component that other people seemed to have. His brother's name was Patrick, 3 years older, lived in the city, the kind of man who laughed easily, and had always had more friends than he could keep up with, and who had been happily married for 9 years to a woman he talked about with the uncomplicated warmth of genuine love. Daniel and Patrick had been close growing up, in the way of brothers who are different but not in conflict, who understand each other enough to leave each other alone in the right ways. They had dinner once a month. Patrick had liked Mara. He had said once, in the way he said most things, casually, between other subjects, "She's good for you, Dan. She brings you out." Daniel had thought about that sentence after Mara left. He had turned it over and looked at it from several angles. She brings you out. He had understood what Patrick meant. She made him talk, made him engage, made him present in a way that he was not always present. But he had also understood something Patrick perhaps had not meant, but that was true. That if you require someone else to bring you out, the question is what happens when they stop? What happens when the effort of bringing someone out eventually costs more than the brought-out person gives back? He called Patrick in August. He did not call to talk about Mara or about what had happened. That was not how they operated, and Patrick was wise enough not to push. He called because he had a feeling, low and insistent, that he needed to talk to someone who knew him, and Patrick was the only person who did. They had a beer together. Patrick did not ask how he was in the searching way that would have made Daniel defensive. He just sat there and talked about other things and at one point said simply, "If you ever want to talk about any of it, I am here." Daniel had nodded. He had not talked about any of it that evening, but he had driven home thinking about the phrase, "I am here." The ease with which Patrick said it, the genuine, uncomplicated offer it was. He thought about the people in his life who said things like that and meant them, and never required anything of him for the meaning. He thought about whether he had ever said something like that and meant it, fully, in both directions. He made the appointment with Philip 2 weeks later. The first session was difficult in a specific way. Daniel was good at speaking about things from a remove. He could describe situations, facts, sequences of events, with precision and clarity. He could outline what had happened in the relationship in a way that was coherent and complete and entirely evacuated of feeling. Philip listened to all of it and at the end of the session said, "That was a very good account of what happened. What I am curious about is what you felt while it was happening." Daniel had looked at him. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Philip said quietly, "that you have described a 3-year relationship ending, and you have not once told me how any of it felt. What did it feel like when she told you the relationship was over?" Silence. "I understood it," Daniel said. "That is not what I asked," Philip said. Daniel sat with this. The question sat in the air between them. He was aware that an answer existed somewhere inside him, and that it was not accessible in the way he was used to things being accessible. He could not produce it efficiently. He could not draw a line from the question to the response, the way he could draw a line from a structural problem to its solution. "I do not know," he said finally. "I do not know how to answer that." Philip nodded. "That," he said, "is where we start." The work of the next months was unlike any work Daniel had done. He was used to problems that had forms. You could see them, measure them, identify the failure point, design a solution. Emotional work, he discovered, did not work like that. The material was not fixed. It moved. It appeared in different shapes on different days. He would believe he had understood something and then find, a week later, that he had understood only the surface of it, and the actual thing was several layers deeper. He did not find this comfortable. He found it at times genuinely distressing. He had sat in Philip's office in October and been closer to tears than he had been since he was a boy, and he had not known what to do with the proximity of them. And Philip had said, "You can cry in here. It is allowed." And Daniel had sat there in that neutral room and let it happen, which was the most exposed he had felt in his adult life, and which had, counterintuitively, left him feeling lighter than he had going in. He thought about his father. He had thought about his father a great deal in these months, not with anger. His father had not been cruel, had not been absent in the way of fathers who are not there, but with a new kind of understanding. His father had been a man who showed care through action. Through the money saved and the school fees paid and the house maintained and the problems solved, he had shown up to every school event. He had been there, in the room, reliably and consistently, and he had not once, in the entirety of Daniel's childhood, talked about a feeling. Daniel understood now that he had grown up inside a language that had no vocabulary for inner experience. He had been taught, not deliberately but completely, that feelings were private, and that privacy was the highest form of strength. He had been shaped, over the course of his entire childhood, into a man who processed everything inward and offered nothing outward, and believed, genuinely believed, that this was simply the correct way to live. The cost of this, Philip helped him see, was not a cost Daniel bore alone. He bore it, but so did everyone who got close to him. He wrote to Mara in November. He sat down with paper and a pen. He had felt, instinctively, that this required paper and a pen rather than a screen and a keyboard, that it needed to be slow, and he wrote for a long time. He told her things he had never told anyone. He told her that he knew, now, what she had meant about loneliness. He told her that he was beginning to understand the geography of his own interior life, which had been a country without a map until recently. He told her that what she had said to him, the real conversation, the birthday morning, the "I need you to actually listen," had been the most important thing anyone had said to him in his adult life, not because it ended their relationship, but because it had started something in him that he had not known needed starting. He rewrote the letter 4 times, not because the words were wrong but because he needed to be certain they were not an appeal. He was not writing to ask her back. He was not writing to give her information that would make her feel she owed him a response. He was writing because he owed her the truth. He owed it to her, after 3 years of failing to give her the honesty she had deserved, and because the writing of it was part of his own process of understanding what he had done and what it had cost. He held the final version for 3 weeks before he sent it. He read it again and again. He asked himself each time, is this for her or is this for me? The honest answer, always, was both. He was not pure in his motivations. He wanted her to know what he had come to understand. He also, somewhere beneath everything, hoped that the knowing might matter to her. He acknowledged this to Philip. Philip said, "That is human. The question is whether you are able to send it without attaching an expectation to the reply." He worked on this. He thought he had managed it, more or less. He mailed the letter on a gray Tuesday in December. A real letter, in an envelope, addressed to her at the new apartment. He had the address from the final utility correspondence. He walked to the postbox on the corner and stood there for a moment, before dropping it in. He thought about the bridge, the canal, the ring in his pocket, the promises he had made and not kept. He thought, I am sorry. I am genuinely, entirely sorry. He dropped the letter in. He walked home in the cold. He did not know if she would read it. He did not know if she would respond. He had tried to prepare himself for silence, which would be fair, which would be her absolute right. He had tried, and he was not sure he had succeeded, but he had tried. He went home to the apartment. He made dinner. He sat at the table and ate alone in the way he had been eating alone since April, and the silence of the apartment was the same as it always was, but something was different in him. Something had shifted. He was not the same man who had stood at that kitchen table on a birthday morning and said, "I hear you," and then looked away. He did not know yet what kind of man he was becoming. That was the honest answer. He did not have a complete picture. He was in the middle of the thing, in the place where the work is still work and the outcome is not yet clear. But he was doing the work. That, Philip had said, was enough for now. Not enough to fix anything. Not enough to undo what had been. Just enough to move forward from where he was. He cleared the table. He washed up. He went to the spare room, the room he had started using for something other than work, a room where he had, at Philip's suggestion, begun keeping a notebook and writing things down when they arrived, and he sat for a while with the notebook in his lap. He did not write anything that evening. He just sat. He breathed. He let the quiet of the apartment be what it was, not empty, not accusatory, just quiet. Outside the window the city moved on. It always did. He was moving too, finally. Slowly, haltingly, without any certainty about the destination. But moving. The letter arrived in Mara's mailbox on a Thursday morning in December, 3 days before she was due to travel to her parents for Christmas. She found it when she got home from work, in among the usual envelopes, a bank statement, a card from her aunt, something from the local council about recycling. She recognized the handwriting before she read the name on the back. She stood in the hallway of her building, coat still on, and held the envelope. She looked at the writing on the front, her name, her new address, his handwriting, which she knew as well as she knew most things about him. She did not open it immediately. She carried it upstairs. She put the kettle on. She hung up her coat. She made tea. She sat at the kitchen table and looked at the envelope for a few minutes, and the tree outside the window was bare and dark against the late afternoon sky. Then she opened it. She read it slowly. She read it twice. The letter was long. 4 pages, handwritten, in the precise way he wrote things when he wrote by hand, the small controlled lettering she recognized from the few notes he had left for her over the years. She read it carefully, the way she read everything, paying attention to the sentences rather than just the sense of them. He was in therapy. He had been going since September. He was working on things she had told him needed working on. He had begun to understand, not theoretically, but in the way that means it has actually reached you, what it had cost her to be with him. He was not writing to ask for anything. He was writing because she deserved to know what her honesty had done, what the conversation on the birthday morning and the 3 years before it had set in motion in him. He was writing because he owed her the truth, and the truth was that she had been right, about all of it. She put the letter down. She picked up her tea. She looked at the tree. She felt several things at once, which she was now used to, because the past year had taught her that feelings are not orderly. They do not arrive one at a time, patiently, and wait to be processed before the next one comes. They arrive together, in a cluster, and you have to hold them simultaneously and identify each one separately without letting any of them do the identifying for you. She felt moved. The letter was honest in a way he had never been able to be when they were together. She could see the work in it. She recognized what it cost someone like him to say the things the letter said. She felt sad. The old sadness, the one that had lived in her chest for 3 years, had long since given way to something cleaner. But the letter touched something that was still tender. The memory of all those evenings and mornings and conversations that had never reached the depth of what he had put on these 4 pages. She felt clear. There was the word again, the word she had arrived at in the restaurant a year ago and that had not left her. She read the letter and she felt clear, which meant she could see it exactly as it was. A genuine thing, a valuable thing, a thing that spoke well of him, without it meaning what it might once have meant to her. She thought, he has done the work. He has finally, genuinely done the work. She thought, and I am glad for him. She thought, and I do not want to go back. These two thoughts did not contradict each other. She had learned that. Things did not have to be incompatible just because they were both true at the same time. She finished her tea. She put the letter on the kitchen table. She cooked dinner. Something simple, the kind of meal she made on weekdays when she wanted comfort rather than effort. She ate. She did the dishes. She called Nora. He wrote to me, she said. Nora was quiet for a moment. What did it say? Mara told her the broad strokes, not the private things, those were his, but the outline, that he was in therapy, that he understood now, that he was sorry. How do you feel? Nora asked. Glad for him, Mara said, and clear. Nora knew what the word meant. She had heard it before. Are you going to write back? Mara thought about this. She had been thinking about it since she sat down at the kitchen table. I think so, she said. Not yet, but I think so. He deserves a reply. You do not owe him one, Nora said. I know, Mara said, but I want to give one, because I am not angry at him. I am actually okay, and I think it would be good for him to know that. She did not write back that night. She did not write back until the new year. She put the letter away in a drawer and she went to her parents for Christmas, and had a wonderful Christmas, the kind where everything is easy and familiar and warm, where she ate too much and laughed a great deal, and slept in her childhood bedroom, and woke to the sound of her parents moving around the house below and felt, deeply and completely, the extraordinary ordinary luck of having people who loved her without complication. She came back in January. She sat at the kitchen table and wrote to Daniel. Her letter was shorter than his. Not because she had less to say, but because she did not need to say as much. She told him she was glad he was doing the work. She told him she hoped it continued. She told him she had read his letter carefully and that she believed him. That she had always been able to tell when he meant something and she believed he meant this. She told him she was okay. She told him this was not a door opening but an acknowledgement, and she trusted he would understand the difference. She did not tell him she was happy. She decided he did not need the details of her life, but she was happy, quietly, steadily, undramatically happy. She sealed the envelope. She mailed it. She came home and made coffee and stood at the kitchen window and looked at the tree, which in January was bare down to its most essential branches, just the bare true structure of it, all the seasonal decorations stripped away, nothing left but what it actually was. She liked it best like this. She had discovered this about herself in November. She liked the tree best when it was honest, when there was nothing left but the shape underneath. She stood there for a while. Then she turned and made breakfast, and the day came in through the east windows the way it always did, and the morning was hers, and everything that came next was still open. The text came in March, nearly a year after the moving day. She was on her lunch break, sitting on a bench outside the publishing house, eating the sandwich she had made that morning, something with roasted vegetables and good cheese. The kind of lunch she had started making for herself on Sundays to last the week. A small domestic habit she had arrived at gradually and found she enjoyed. The day was cold but clear, the kind of late winter day that promises spring without quite delivering it yet. She looked at her phone and saw his name. The text said, "I hope it is okay to text. I have been thinking about something for a while, and I wanted to ask if you would meet me. Not to change anything, just to talk. I think it would mean something to me. I understand completely if the answer is no." She read it 3 times. She put the phone back in her bag. She finished her sandwich. She watched a pigeon argue with a crisp packet on the pavement across from the bench. She thought about the letter he had sent in December and the letter she had sent back in January. The exchange that had been brief and honest, and had closed something rather than opened it. She thought about what he meant by, "mean something to me," and whether she believed that was all he meant. And she found she did believe it. He was not a dishonest man. He was a man who had been emotionally unable, which was a different thing. She thought about herself, about where she was, which was a place of genuine stability. She was not afraid of seeing him. She was not afraid of being destabilized by it. The woman who had feared that her love for him would, given proximity, override everything she had built, that woman had existed, had been a real person, had made real and sensible decisions based on real and sensible fears. But she was not that woman anymore. She had done enough of her own work to know that. She was curious, she realized, not with longing, with genuine curiosity, the kind you feel towards someone you have known deeply and who has apparently been changing in significant ways. She wanted to see it. She wanted to know if what the letter had suggested was actually true, if the therapy and the months of work had produced something different in him, something real that you could see in his face rather than just read in his words. She texted back that evening. "Yes, coffee, somewhere public. You choose the place." He replied quickly, "Thank you. Saturday at 11, there is a place on Langton Street I have been going to. Would that work?" "Yes," she said. She told Nora before she told anyone else, because Nora always needed a moment to calibrate, and it was better to give her that moment in advance rather than after the event. "Why?" Nora said. "Because I want to," Mara said, "and because I am not going in hoping for anything. I am going because I am actually okay, and I think it might be good for both of us to sit across from each other in that." Nora was quiet. "Are you sure you are okay?" "Yes," Mara said. "I am actually sure. That is what is new." She chose her clothes on Saturday morning without overthinking them. Dark trousers, the soft gray sweater she wore on days when she wanted to feel like herself. She took the bus. She arrived 2 minutes early and went inside and ordered a coffee at the counter and took a table by the window because she liked sitting by windows and she was not going to rearrange her preferences for this occasion. He arrived at 11 exactly. She watched him come through the door. She watched him look around and find her and move toward her, and she watched his face in the moment he saw her. The brief, contained expression of someone trying not to show too much before they know whether showing anything is welcome. He looked different. Not dramatically different. His face was the same face, but there was something in the quality of his presence that was not what she remembered. He was less sealed. That was the word that arrived in her mind. He looked like a man who was less sealed. "Hi," he said. "Hi," she said. He sat down. He ordered coffee from the server who came to the table. He held the cup when it came with both hands, which she had always noticed him do when he was slightly nervous, and she noted this detail with affection and without it meaning more than it meant. "Thank you for coming," he said. "You're welcome," she said. A pause that was not awkward. Just the pause of two people who have a history together and are both currently choosing to be present rather than disappear into it. "How are you?" he said. "I am well," she said. Genuinely. "You?" "Better than I was," he said. "Which is the most honest answer?" She nodded. "Philip?" He looked slightly surprised that she remembered the name from the letter. "Still going," he said. "Every week." "Good," she said, and meant it. He looked at her for a moment. "You look well," he said. "Not in a..." He stopped. "I mean, you look like yourself. More than you did, sometimes, when we were together. I noticed it then and I could not name it. Now I can name it." "What do you call it?" she said. "Like you have enough room," he said. "Like you are the right size for where you are." She looked at him. She thought about the 3 years. She thought about the woman who had stood on this bridge in the cold with a ring on her finger and a heart full of belief. She thought about the stone in her chest and the birthday dinner and the morning she had said, "I need you to actually listen." "That is a good way to put it," she said. He nodded. He looked at his coffee. He looked at her. "I need to ask you something," he said. "And you do not have to answer it. and you can tell me to leave it alone. Go on, she said. Is there anything I could do, or be, that would make you consider trying again? The question was in the room. She had half expected it, which was why she had thought about it in advance, which was why she had been so certain of the answer before she even arrived. She did not make him wait long. She said, "No." He nodded. His face did not fall apart. He had prepared for this. He had prepared because Philip had probably helped him prepare, and because he was a different kind of man than he had been, and different kinds of men do different kinds of preparation. "I needed to ask," he said. "I wanted to hear the answer from you." "I know," she said. She looked at him across the table. She thought carefully about what she wanted to say, because she did not want to wound him unnecessarily, and she also did not want to be indirect, because she had done enough of that in her life, and had learned its cost. "You wrote me a letter," she said. "That was the most honest thing I have ever received from you, and it told me something true, that you are capable of the thing I needed, somewhere inside you, that it exists. What it also told me, what 3 years told me, is that finding it took all of this. That it took me leaving, and the months alone, and the therapy, and a long and real and painful process. And I am glad you went through that process. I am glad for you, genuinely. But I cannot be the reason you did it, and also the reward for doing it. That is not fair to either of us." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I know that. I think I knew it before I asked." "Why did you ask?" "Because I needed to hear myself be honest about it," he said. "I needed to say it out loud and not hide it. Because hiding it was what I always did, and I am trying to stop doing it." She understood that. She understood it very well. She had spent a year learning to do the same thing. "For what it's worth," she said, "I think you are different. I can see it. I believe it." "That helps," he said quietly. She finished her coffee. She wrapped her hands around the warm cup and looked at him across the table, and she thought, this is what it looks like when something is over and both people know it. Not ugly, not with hostility, just two people at a table, honest with each other, putting something down together. She thought, it took us too long to learn to do this, and I am glad we can finally do it. "I hope you keep going," she said, "with the work. I hope you find someone who gets the version of you that you are building. I mean that completely." He looked at her. She thought she saw something in his face that might have been the edge of grief, not grief for her specifically, or not only for her, but for the 3 years and what they could have been. She let it be there. She did not try to fix it. "I know you mean it," he said. "That is the thing about you. You always mean it." She smiled, not a big smile, just the quiet kind. "Take care of yourself, Daniel," she said. "You too," he said. She put on her coat. She picked up her bag. She stood up. He looked up at her. He did not say anything else. She thought, for a moment, that he might. But he simply looked at her, and she looked at him, and then she nodded once, and she turned and she walked out. The street was cold and bright. She stood on the pavement for a moment, breathing the sharp March air. A bus went past. 2 children ran by arguing about something important. A man sold flowers from a bucket outside the nearest shop, red ones, unseasonable and cheerful. She walked to the bus stop. She stood and waited with her coat buttoned and her bag over her shoulder, and her feet on the ground of the city she had lived in for 6 years. She was not sad, exactly. She was not fine, exactly. She was somewhere true, in the complicated, honest, layered place of a person who has been through something real, and has come out the other side without pretending the through part had been easy. She thought about the bowl she had made in October, the one that had turned out right, the simple shape, the even rim, the greenish-blue glaze. She thought about what her instructor had said when she stood beside her and looked at it. That's it. She thought, yes. The bus came. She got on. She found a seat by the window, which she always did. She watched the city pass. She thought about the afternoon, what she might do, whether she wanted to walk for a while, whether she wanted to call Nora, or whether she wanted the afternoon to herself. She thought she wanted it to herself. She wanted to walk, maybe, down to the canal, which she had not been to in a while, which she had avoided somewhat since the bridge. Maybe it was time to take it back. She got off a stop early and walked. The canal was gray and still in the March light. She walked along the towpath. She walked at her own pace, which was the only pace she walked at now. She passed the ordinary bridge, iron and unremarkable, and she stopped on it and looked at the water below. She thought about standing on this bridge 3 years ago with her hand in his, and the ring new on her finger, and the promises coming out of him in the cold air. She thought about standing on this bridge after the lunch with Nora, a year ago, looking at the ring and wondering what came next. She thought about standing here now, alone, in March, with the water gray below, and the city going on around her, and all the decisions made and all the living done, and the specific freedom of someone who has chosen herself. She did not linger. She was not the kind of person who lingered on bridges to be theatrical about it. She looked at the water for a moment, and then she walked on. The afternoon opened ahead of her, hers, all of it. She walked. She walked for almost 2 hours that afternoon. She walked without a destination, which was her favorite kind of walking, the kind that lets the city show you things you would not have found if you had been going somewhere specific. She walked along the canal for a while, then turned onto a street she did not know, then found herself in a neighborhood she had been through only once before, a quiet residential area where the houses were tall and narrow and some of them had window boxes beginning to show the first green of spring. She was thinking, while she walked, but not in the heavy and circular way she had sometimes thought during the past 3 years, the thinking that turned on itself and found its way back to the same questions without ever resolving them. This was different. More like water moving than water standing. She was moving through it, and it was moving through her, and neither one was trying to stop the other. She thought about the coffee that morning. She thought about his face when he came through the door, the way he was less sealed. She thought about what he had said, like you have enough room, like you are the right size for where you are. And she thought about how strange and true it was that he could see that now when he had not been able to see it while she was standing right beside him for 3 years. The distance had given him the view. The loss had given him the language. She felt no bitterness about this. She had arrived at a place, in the past year, where bitterness was not a productive thing to carry, and she had put it down along with several other heavy things. What she felt instead was something closer to a kind of philosophical recognition. People become capable of things on their own timelines, and sometimes those timelines do not match yours, and that is not a failure. It is just the shape of things. She thought about his question, whether there was anything he could do that would make her consider trying again, and she thought about the clarity with which she had answered no, and she examined that clarity now, in the quiet of the walking, and found it was still sound. It did not feel like defensiveness. It did not feel like pride. It felt like the truth of where she was, which was a place so genuinely forward-looking that the looking back was not even tempting. She had loved him. She had loved him honestly and completely, and had paid real costs for that love. And she was not going back, not because of hurt, not because of anger, but because the woman she was now had been built on the other side of that relationship, and she was not interested in dismantling her to see what had been underneath. She was not unfinished anymore. That was the thing. During the 3 years with Daniel she had felt, in a way she could not always articulate, like an unfinished version of herself, like she was perpetually waiting for some condition to be met before she could be fully who she was, waiting for him to be present so she could be present, waiting for the relationship to settle so she could settle, waiting for the future to begin. She had spent 3 years in the waiting room of her own life. She was not waiting anymore. The life was going. She was in it. She turned down another street she did not know. She found, unexpectedly, a bookshop. Small, independent, the kind with handwritten recommendation cards tucked into the shelves and a cat asleep on the counter. She went in because she always went into this kind of bookshop. She stood in the fiction section for 20 minutes and she found a novel she had not heard of, that had a first page so good she bought it without reading any further. The cat on the counter opened one eye when she paid and then closed it again. She walked out with the book under her arm, and the afternoon was later now, the light lower and more golden, and she thought about dinner. She thought about what she would cook. She thought about the figs on the kitchen table. She was growing the fig tree from a cutting and it was doing well, producing small amounts of actual fruit now, which pleased her out of all proportion to the size of the harvest. She thought about whether to call Nora this evening or save the telling for tomorrow. She thought Nora would want to hear tonight. She would call. She walked home through the better end of the day, the part where the light goes sideways and makes ordinary buildings look briefly extraordinary. She let herself in and hung up her coat and kicked off her shoes and put the kettle on and looked at the tree in the darkening evening light. The tree was bare still. It was only March, but she knew, from the past year of watching it, that what looked like bare was actually ready. The energy was all inside the branches. The opening would come when conditions were right. She made tea. She sat at the kitchen table. She called Nora. "Tell me," Nora said, before she had said a word. So she told her. All of it, in order, the way she told things, carefully, with attention to what actually happened rather than what the telling of it could become. She told Nora about sitting by the window and ordering coffee first. She told her about his face when he came in. She told her about the question and the answer, and what she had said about not being both the reason and the reward. She told her about walking afterward, about the bookshop and the cat and the novel with the good first page. Nora was quiet for a moment after she finished. Then she said, "How do you feel?" "I feel fine," Mara said. "Actually fine. Not, I am telling myself I am fine, fine, actually fine." "You sound it," Nora said. "I know," Mara said. "That is what is remarkable." They talked for another 20 minutes. Nora told her about a thing that had happened at work, something funny and mildly absurd, and Mara laughed, and the kitchen was warm around her. She ate dinner after the call, the simple kind, standing slightly at the counter because she was hungry and did not want to wait the time it would take to sit. She ate the fig from the tree on the windowsill, just one, small and sweet, directly from her hand. She read her new novel afterward, on the sofa, the Cat and Bookshop novel, with the good first page. The first page had delivered on its promise. She read for 2 hours. She had not read that fluidly in months. Sometimes the evenings were good for reading and sometimes they were not, and tonight everything was settled enough that she fell into the book completely, and did not surface until well past 10. She went to bed. She lay in the dark. She was not thinking about Daniel. She was thinking about the novel. She was thinking about the character on page 37, who had said something she wanted to go back and reread tomorrow. She was thinking about whether the fig tree would produce more fruit if she moved it to the other window where the light was slightly stronger. She was thinking, in other words, about her own life, her actual current life, the one she was living rather than the one she had left. She closed her eyes. She thought, "I chose myself." She thought, "This is what that looks like." She thought, a kitchen and a tree and a novel with a good first page, and a sister who picks up on the first ring, and a lunch once a week with a man who brings birthday cake a day late because he remembered, a pottery bowl with a good rim, a fig tree producing small and actual fruit, Saturday mornings and a bakery, and a woman named Iris with opinions about butter, east windows, morning light. She thought, this. She slept. Spring was 2 weeks away, though the tree did not know yet that it was spring. It stood in the night outside the window, bare and ready, full of everything that was about to arrive. And inside, in the warm dark of a room that was hers, a woman breathed steadily and slept without tension, without the particular quality of watchfulness that had been her companion for 3 years, without the stone. Just breathing, just sleeping, just being completely and quietly herself. Spring arrived the way it always does, not all at once but in accumulation. The light first, then the temperature, then the first hesitant green on the tree outside her window, pale as new paper, delicate, tentative, and then more of it, until one morning in April she looked out and found the tree in full leaf, and the day was warm, and she opened the kitchen window for the first time since autumn, and stood there breathing. She had been in the new apartment for exactly 1 year. She had not planned to mark this date. She had not written it in her calendar or set a reminder. She was not a person who commemorated things by herself, in general. She saved that for other people, showed up to the important dates in their lives with real presence and real attention. But this date had arrived and she had woken up and looked at the calendar and seen it, and sat for a moment with it, the way you sit with a 1-year mark on anything significant. 1 year. She thought about what a year contained. She thought about the first weeks in the new apartment, the boxes and the odd narrow room and the tree she had not yet fully trusted, and the sleep that had come back to her like a friend who had been away too long. She thought about the pottery class and the bowl with the good rim. She thought about walking on Saturdays and Iris and the almond pastry. She thought about Owen leaving cake on her desk, about Polly on the sofa saying this place is very you, about her mother saying you are happy, and the ease with which she had been able to say yes. She thought about Daniel's letter arriving in December, about sitting at this kitchen table reading it twice. She thought about the coffee in March and the walk to the canal and the bridge and the bookshop and the novel and the cat. She thought, 1 year. She made herself an especially good breakfast that morning to mark the occasion. Eggs the way she liked them, toast from good bread, the last of the good fig jam she had bought at the Christmas market. She ate at the kitchen table with the window open and the spring coming in, and the tree across the way fully itself, unambiguously alive, past the hesitation of early spring, and into the real thing. She called Claire after breakfast. It was a Saturday. Claire was at home with her husband and their small daughter, who was 2, and who Mara could hear somewhere in the background making the kind of sustained, enthusiastic noise that 2-year-olds make. 1 year today, Mara said. I know, Claire said. I was thinking about you. How are you thinking about me? Proudly, Claire said. With great pride. Mara laughed. That is generous. It is accurate, Claire said. You went through something very hard and you came out of it, and you built something real on the other side. That is not nothing. That is, actually, everything. Mara held the phone and looked at the kitchen wall. She had hung a small print there, not the one from the old apartment, a different one. Something she had bought at a market in November, a print by a local artist she had not heard of, a simple line drawing of a window with light coming through it. She had bought it because she liked it and for no other reason, which had felt, at the time, like something worth practicing. "I have been thinking," Mara said, "about what I have learned. About myself, I mean. I keep trying to find the right words for it." "Tell me," Claire said. "I think the main thing," Mara said slowly, "is that I confused patience with acceptance. I thought I was being patient with him, waiting for him to grow. But what I was actually doing, a lot of the time, was accepting less than I needed and calling it patience, so it sounded like a virtue. There is a difference between those two things, and I did not know there was a difference until I had to live it." Claire was quiet. "And I think the other thing," Mara continued, "is that I believed, for a long time, that needing things from the person you love was a kind of weakness. That the best version of love was one where you needed as little as possible and gave as much as possible. And I know now that is wrong. Needing things from each other is not weakness. It is what makes it a relationship rather than just two people occupying the same space." "Who told you needing things was weakness?" Claire said. Mara thought about this. Nobody had told her. It had assembled itself from smaller pieces. A cultural idea here, a family pattern there, a relationship that rewarded her smallness with brief warmth and penalized her largeness with withdrawal. "Nobody and everyone," she said. "You know now," Claire said. "I know now," Mara agreed. She spent the rest of the morning in the flat, doing nothing in particular. She read some of the novel she was currently working through. She watered the fig tree, which had survived its second winter, and was producing new growth with what she could only describe as confidence. She cleaned the kitchen, which did not need much cleaning but which she cleaned anyway because she liked the results. She sat on the sofa for an hour and did not do anything at all, which she had learned to allow herself, which had taken longer than she expected to learn. At lunchtime she walked to the bakery and had coffee with Iris, who had by now moved from selling Mara pastries to occasionally sitting with her for the quieter part of the Saturday afternoon. They talked, as they often did, about things that were not about either of their lives directly but that were adjacent to them, about a film Iris had seen, about a book Mara was editing, about the neighborhood and what was changing in it. It was the kind of conversation she had more of now than she used to. Easy, warm, without stakes. The conversations that accumulated into a life. She walked home through the afternoon. The city was full of people who had the same idea. Warm Saturday in April, finally. The kind of day you spend outside just to prove to yourself that winter actually ended. She liked being among them. She did not feel lonely in crowds the way she sometimes had. She felt a part of it, the general project of people going about their days in a world that, whatever its difficulties, was also full of warm Saturdays and spring and good bread, and people walking with no particular hurry. She stopped at the florist and bought a bunch of yellow flowers. She did not know what kind. She was not a person who knew the names of flowers, because they were bright and the apartment needed them and she was allowed to buy herself flowers. She put them in a vase when she got home. A vase she had made herself, in the more advanced class. It was not her best piece. The glaze had done something unexpected in the kiln and come out with a slightly mottled effect she had not intended. But it held water, and it held flowers, and it was hers. She put it on the kitchen table. She took a step back and looked at it, the yellow flowers in the imperfect vase on the kitchen table in the afternoon light, the tree visible through the window behind, the open air coming through. She thought, 1 year. She thought about the woman she had been at the start of the year before this one, standing in a restaurant in a green dress making a decision so quiet that nobody in the room knew it was happening. She thought about what it had taken to get from that moment to this one, the conversations and the moving boxes and the sleep and the walks and the pottery and the friendships maintained, and the grief processed and the mornings spent slowly, on purpose, in her own company. She thought about Daniel in his therapy session in a neutral room, doing the work he should have been doing 3 years earlier. She hoped he was still going. She hoped it was reaching him. She felt no attachment to the outcome for herself, only the genuine well-wishing of someone who has put a thing fully down and picked up something better. She was, she realized, not afraid anymore. This was the quietest and most fundamental change. She had been afraid for a long time, afraid to say what she needed, afraid to demand what she deserved, afraid of losing the relationship, and afraid of what would be left without it. She had moved through 3 years with a background hum of fear that she had mistaken for reasonable caution. She was not afraid. She was not afraid of being alone, because she had been alone and found it manageable, more than manageable, found it something to build inside, rather than something to escape. She was not afraid of needing things because she knew now that her needs were not excessive, and that saying them clearly was not an act of aggression, but an act of respect for both people. She was not afraid of the future, because the future was open, and she had learned, in the past year, that openness is not a threat. She sat at the kitchen table. She looked at the yellow flowers in the imperfect vase. She looked at the tree. She looked at the light on the wall. She thought about everything and she thought about nothing, and both of those things were equally available to her, which was the most significant freedom she had found. She did not know, on this particular Saturday afternoon, what the next year would hold. She did not know whether she would meet someone, fall in love again, risk the whole complicated project of letting a person fully in. She did not know whether her career would go in the direction she hoped, or find a new direction she had not expected. She did not know whether the odd, narrow room would remain odd and narrow, or become something she had not yet thought of. She did not know what the tree would look like in 20 years or whether she would still be watching it. She did not need to know. That was the thing. She had spent so much of her recent life trying to know, trying to control the outcome, trying to stay one step ahead of disappointment, trying to manage her own expectations into a shape that could not be broken. She did not do that anymore. She had learned that the trying was more exhausting than the uncertainty, and that the uncertainty, when you stopped fighting it, was not actually very frightening. She poured herself a glass of water. She opened the novel, still the same one from the bookshop in March. She was a slow reader when she was busy, a fast one when she had space, and she found her page. Nora called at 6. They talked for 40 minutes and ended up laughing about something that was only funny to the two of them because of the particular shared history that made it funny. The kind of joke that exists entirely within a relationship and would be meaningless explained to anyone outside it. She said goodbye and sat smiling for a moment in the quiet. She made dinner. She put on music, something she liked, the kind of music she had not played as much during the years with Daniel because it had not been his preference and she had adjusted without meaning to. She played it at a volume that filled the apartment, which was her apartment and needed no adjusting to anyone. She cooked and listened and moved around the kitchen in the easy, unhurried way of someone who is comfortable in their own space. She ate at the table. The yellow flowers were still very yellow in the evening light. She ate good food and she read her novel, and she did not look at her phone, because there was no one she needed to hear from that she had not already heard from, and she had learned, this year, the particular pleasure of that. She did the dishes. She turned down the music. She sat on the sofa for a while in the kind of companionable quiet that you can only sit in when the silence is yours. She went to bed at 10:30, which was the right time for her. She had learned her own rhythms with the precision you only achieve when you are paying attention to yourself rather than to someone else. She needed 8 hours. She woke best with east light. She thought most clearly in the mornings and felt most herself in the late afternoons. These were simple things and they were entirely hers. She lay in the dark. Through the window, the city was doing its nighttime version of itself. Lower, quieter, but not quiet, never fully quiet. She had always liked that. The evidence of other people's continuing lives, going on beyond the walls. She thought about the year. She let it move through her mind in the slow way of a summary you make for yourself, a private account of what had happened and what it meant and where it had brought you. She did not arrive at any conclusions she had not already arrived at. The year had said what it had to say and she had heard it. She thought, I chose myself. She thought, I would choose myself again. She thought, I will. She closed her eyes. The room was warm and dark and hers. The tree outside was full of leaves that were full of spring. She breathed. She slept. She did not dream of any part of what had been. She dreamed, if she dreamed at all, and she did not remember in the morning, of something forward, something still to come, something she had not yet imagined the shape of, which was, of all the things in her life right now, the one she was most looking forward to. Not because the past had been nothing. It had been something. It had been real and full and difficult and instructive, and it had made her who she was. But she was done looking at it. The next thing was out there somewhere, in the open and as yet unnamed future. She was walking toward it, unhurried, on her own terms, at her own pace. And she was ready. The following Monday she was back at her desk. The manuscript she was currently editing, a debut novel by a young writer who had extraordinary instincts and not yet the full technical skill to execute them, which was the most interesting kind of manuscript to work on, was open on her screen. She had left off mid-chapter on Friday, in the middle of a scene that was doing something interesting but needed help to do it cleanly. She returned to it now with the specific pleasure of someone returning to work they care about. Owen appeared at her door at 10 with coffee. He did not ask how her weekend was in the way of someone filling a silence. He asked because he wanted to know. There was a difference, and she had learned to recognize it. Good, she said. 1 year in the new place. He nodded. How does that feel? Like something I built, she said, which is the right way for it to feel. He left the coffee on her desk and went back to his own work. She picked it up and returned to her manuscript. She worked through the morning with her full attention. She found the place where the scene was losing its thread, and she worked through it carefully, suggesting to the author on the margin where the scene wanted to go if it trusted itself, where it was pulling back when it should be pressing forward. She had always been good at this, at finding where a thing was restraining itself unnecessarily and showing it where to breathe. Her supervisor had told her once, in a rare moment of direct praise, that she had an instinct for narrative momentum. She had been pleased by this, and she had carried it with care. At lunchtime, she went outside. She sat on the bench where she had been sitting the day the text from Daniel had arrived in March. She ate her sandwich and she thought about the conversation she had sent to herself over the past year, and what she would say now if she could send a message back to the woman who had been sitting on this bench reading a request for a meeting. She would say, "Go. You are ready. You will know exactly what to say. You will not need to brace for it." She had not needed to brace for it. She had been right about that. The afternoon passed. She reviewed 3 chapters. She sent feedback to the author, encouraging but specific, the balance she always tried for. She filed a report for the acquisitions team about a manuscript she had been asked to assess. She liked afternoons like this, full and purposeful and clean. At 5, she left the office. She took the bus. She watched the city go by. She stopped at the market on the way home, not the big one, the small one on the corner that had the good vegetables and the herbs she liked, and a man who sold cheese on Fridays who had the best conversations. It was Monday, so no cheese, but she found what she needed. She chose things with care, as she always did. She had developed over the past year a real pleasure in this, in choosing, in the daily act of deciding what she wanted, and finding it, and bringing it home. It was such a small thing. It was also, in some way she could not entirely articulate, a symbol of something larger. Every small decision in favor of her own preferences was a muscle she had been building. The muscle was strong now. She cooked dinner. She ate it looking out at the tree, which in the evening light had a particular quality. The leaves still knew enough to let the light through rather than blocking it. She thought about the seasons she had watched the tree go through. 1 full cycle, plus a little. She knew its rhythms now. She trusted that what looked like absence in winter was not absence but accumulation. She knew it came back. She had the evidence. She washed up. She made tea. She sat at the kitchen table with a book. She had been reading a lot of poetry lately. Not exclusively. She still read novels, would always read novels. But poetry had arrived in her life in the past few months in the way things arrive when you are ready for them. A collection had been left in the office by someone, and she had picked it up and taken it home. She had gone to a reading at a bookshop in February and heard a poet read her own work in a way that rearranged something. She was still working out what it meant to her. She thought it might have to do with attention. Poetry required a different kind of attention from prose. Slower, more exact. A willingness to sit inside a sentence longer than you naturally wanted to. She had grown better at that. She was still growing. She read for 2 hours. She went to bed at the right time. She lay in the dark and she was not afraid, and she was not waiting, and she was not anything other than a woman in her life. At the end of an ordinary good day, breathing. In another part of the city, Daniel was in his study with his notebook. He wrote things down that Philip had suggested writing down, and sometimes he wrote other things that came from somewhere else. Things he was beginning to understand about himself and about the way he had moved through the world. He was in the middle of the long and uncomfortable work of becoming different, and he was doing it without any guarantee that different would mean better, only with the knowledge that staying the same had already cost him more than he wanted to think about. He did not think about Mara every day now. He thought about her less than he used to, not because he felt less, but because Philip had helped him understand that thinking about her was, for a long time, a way of avoiding thinking about himself. He had to do the harder thing, which was the inward thing, which was what he had spent his life avoiding, and he was doing it. He was not okay yet. He was not done. He did not know when done would be, or what it would feel like, or whether that was even the right word for it. Philip said there was no done, not really. There was just more capacity, more awareness, more ability to show up as yourself, rather than the sealed version of yourself. Philip said, the work is what you get, not an outcome. The work itself. Daniel was beginning to understand what that meant. He closed the notebook at 9. He made tea. He had started drinking more tea and less coffee in the evenings. Another small thing that had changed. And he sat for a while in the quiet. He thought about the building project that was in its final weeks. A warehouse conversion. The one he had talked to Mara about over a Saturday breakfast a long time ago. It was nearly done. It was good work. He was proud of it in the way he was proud of things he had made well, the structural pride that was different from personal pride but not entirely separate. He thought, I made something that will stand. He thought, I am also trying to make something that will stand. He went to bed. The apartment was quiet in the way he had adjusted to, which was to say not peacefully quiet but acceptably quiet, the quiet of a place where you are learning to be enough for yourself. Outside the window the city breathed. Both of them, in their separate apartments, in their separate lives, in the separate stories they were now living, moved toward sleep. The city between them did not care about any of it. Cities never do. They absorb every story and go on, and every morning they are there again, ready for what comes next, indifferent to what came before. She would wake in the east light. He would wake in whatever his window let in. She would stand at the kitchen window with her coffee. He would sit at his table and perhaps write something down. She was not waiting for him. She had not been waiting for him since April of the year before, and she would not be waiting for him in the year ahead. She was going forward, at her own pace, in her own direction, entirely herself. And that was enough. More than enough. It was, in fact, the best possible thing. The tree outside her window held its leaves in the dark. Morning was coming. It always was. She slept.